Tired of being stuck, needing something with no time to go out and get it from a store? Need a last-minute gift, but can't pick anything up on the way to the party? Looking for an item that you thought was no longer in existence, but are hoping you might be able to find it hidden away in some back alley bodega? Well, listener, submitted for your approval. Curiosa Couriers. We have the solution to these problems. Our bicycle couriers can locate, obtain, and deliver everything you need. Don't need, didn't know you needed, knew you didn't need, but thought you might at some point. And even the things you thought you'd never find again. Are you looking for a cold bottle of Zima to brighten up the party you're hosting? We've got a case. Did you miss out on the most recent reissue of Crystal Pepsi? It's on the way. Are you trying to find information on a shady government type you recently met who seems to be hiding a dubious past while simultaneously providing you critical information to help you possibly bring down a global terrorist syndicate that may or may not be planning some sort of large-scale attack which you cannot prove without vital information, but you don't know what that information would be or look like? Look in your purse. Curiosa Couriers. Solutions for every need, expected or unexpected. Mapping the Zone listeners can ask for Marvin and receive a free delivery of one surprise item. Item and delivery are chosen randomly by Curiosa Couriers and cannot be provided at the time the order is placed. Don't worry about missing it though. Marvin will know where to find you. Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts here.
My name is Cody.
Luke.
And I'm Will.
We are going to be going through chapters 13, 14, and 15 of Bleeding Edge today. Yeah, I got nothing else to say in the intro, so what are you guys' thoughts on these chapters?
Off to a rollicking start. Oh man, I enjoyed these chapters. I thought they were very entertaining. I was thinking about this today. I think something that I don't know that we've talked about before with any of the books that we've covered is Pynchon's pacing. And I think it is worth mentioning that probably V for sure. Most of his work, I genuinely enjoy the pacing. I feel like it's pretty much always well paced enough to really keep at least me as a reader engaged. There are parts of some books that drag a little bit here and there, but I think in reading these three chapters, coming off of the last three chapters that we did, it just kind of reminded me of how well paced this story is. We had these three chapters earlier that were very information heavy, a lot of just knowledge that's kind of dropped in, whether it's very subtle references to Promise, which you can extrapolate for years it seems on, or literal pages worth of information about whatever is going on in the story. And then you can follow that up with these three chapters that get right back into the kind of thriller detective conspiracy novel that we've been experiencing. So his shifts from the kind of slowing down to give a lot of information and speeding back up to accelerate the plot. I don't know that we've discussed it before, and I just figured it was worth mentioning. For me, at least, I find this to be a very well paced book.
We definitely talked about it a lot with Mason and Dixon, where we would mention how it would go from like really emotionally heavy chapters to something lighter, or something really dense to something easier. But I think that's the only other book that we've really made a comment on it in particular on.
Yeah, for me, this is, you mentioned last episode that chunk of the book had really gotten into the groove of it. At this point, to continue the metaphor, I was really jiving. I really find a lot of fun in these chapters, but also just some very satisfying kind of like I've mentioned vaguely, mostly off air, I think, kind of like proto puzzle box stuff that Pynchon is famous for. And at this point in the book, it's where it really becomes satisfying to engage with the level of kind of the world building.
So not puzzle boxes and J.J. Abrams.
Well, I would say that if we're being honest with ourselves, Abrams and they're the post-Pynchon school, and Pynchon, 60s prior, but because they were famous, we call it puzzle box after them.
Post Pynchon and that post Pynchon and that the center of the puzzle box is a mystery that is ultimately disappointing and annoying and often ruins the actual piece of media because it was
came before it,
never meant to be solved in the first place.
Yeah, missing the point that you're supposed to be making some kind of point by having that lack of a center. There needs to be a purpose to that. It can't just be your method of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry if we pissed off any J.J. Abrams heads that listen to this podcast.
I'm not.
Not that I imagine any of you are actually in our audience.
Let's hope not.
Yeah.
I enjoy some of his stuff. Doesn't mean it's
some
great.
of his early work is like okay.
Yeah. It tends I can enjoy some of his stuff, but it, like Kate mentioned, it tends to get frustrating, especially when you kind of at this point know what's going to happen at the end and how it's just going to all collapse into itself like some House of Usher.
So true. Luke, what did you think of these chapters?
Yeah, I enjoyed these chapters a fair amount. They're kind of just hangout chapters. I'm not, as I said in our first episode on Bleeding Edge, I don't really remember this book very well. There's some parts of it I remember. I've been thinking back to my first read lately, and I think I remember telling my friend who's read like 4 or 5 Pynchon novels, but not Bleeding Edge. He's read all like kind of the more popular major ones. And he was asking me what I thought about this book, years ago, and I remember telling him, it's about 9/11, and there's all this. I don't know. It's a really hard book to wrap your head around, and I am kind of struggling a little bit right now with like what's important and what's not important. Like the Madoff stuff in these chapters, I'm not sure how that really plays into the larger plot.
It's just
other than
timetable
Pynchon.
setting, really.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the karaoke part, but I do kind of struggle with why it's in there. To be perfectly honest, I mean, it's entertaining on a sentence by sentence, page by page level. It's just, what does it really add to the book as a whole? Is something that I'm kind of coming up empty with. Well, another thing I've been thinking about with this book is if I am remembering it correctly, like we don't get a lot of answers by the end of it, which is maybe a bit of a spoiler, but it is this Inherent Vice and Crying of Lot 49. I think are his 3 books where like. It's about the main subject of the book is a conspiracy that's like too vast for any one person to comprehend, which is kind of playing into the puzzle box aspect that Will was talking about. But yeah, so I mean, there's all these disparate parts happening. There's all these disparate, like pieces of the puzzle, and they're not necessarily fitting together yet in my brain. Although we're not even halfway through, so that's probably part of the reason. I don't know. I mean, this does. I really love the part about the landfill in these chapters. The prose there is really good. I do kind of think that it is a bit shoehorned in, and that a lot of that whole segment is just so Pynchon kind of riff on waste and trash, and that aspect of modern life, which is it's a beautiful passage. But
ooh, I may have information for you later that contradicts that.
Okay, I'm perfectly fine with that. But so anyways, just to kind of sum up, I do enjoy these chapters. It's just some of it kind of struck me as random, and I am kind of questioning where this is all going and why I'm getting at least some of this information. Igor comes up later in the book, correct? He's not just like a random one-off.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that does kind of make it a little bit. There's more of a point to Igor than first meets the eye, probably. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I think I think that some of the stuff in this chapter, because you are correct in that, like, does the karaoke scene really have like much of a big deal about anything? You could argue that it is there to set up the conversation that Maxine has towards the end of it with the former contractor for Gabriel Eish and Hagawach, and how like weary he is about speaking on anything at all. Like you could definitely say that the scene is there to set up that conversation. Did that have to happen at the karaoke bar? No. I think the rest of that is really just sort of Pynchon being fun
Pynchon. Yeah.
and being Pynchon. I mean, he has North Korean tourists who are wearing clothes made out of PVC at this karaoke bar as well.
I think that's the thing, is it's just meant you could have that conversation set anywhere. I think it's more fun and kind of deflates the seriousness of that situation in any other book. I think maybe that's its purpose, is just to do that.
Definitely, and I think the other thing too is just to give you more of an insight into Maxine as a character, because the whole reason that she's willing to kind of go out is because she used to go to like disco clubs and she used to be like a nightlife person. So I think, like, as far as the setting itself is concerned, it is primarily there just to showcase more of her character and kind of she's the go with person in your friend group, kind of. She's down to go anywhere. And so I think that's also what a good chunk of these chapters are. It's just like, yes, there are the detective elements, continuing to progress things forward, but it's also just more of a look at like Maxine's life, especially Maxine's life maybe before she had kids, because obviously their kids are out with Horst, going through the Midwest doing God knows what, because they're not, as someone who's lived in the Midwest like her whole life, if you're not going to Chicago or like Minneapolis, I'm not really sure what you're showing them. Maybe they're taking a tour of a dairy in operation or something, but yeah, you get a better sense through these chapters of maybe what she was like before she was married, before she had kids. There's the different kind of New York City aspects of the continuing gentrification and continuing sort of redevelopment, and that plays into the trash stuff later somewhat. So it's just sort of more background and set dressing and all of that, I think, for the city and for Maxine, as far as what Pynchon's really up to in these chapters. I enjoyed the hell out of them because it only took me like, an hour and a half to read them, as opposed to 3 days.
It's much more easier.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I think, another reason why these chapters take place in sequence immediately after the previous 3. I'm not saying that Pynchon anticipated people doing a podcast on his work where they go into the detail from the previous 3 chapters, but I'm sure that he would believe that a good chunk of his readers by 2013 were looking up the stuff he was making references to, which to kind of tie that back into Cody's structural point, and especially what we talked about in Mason and Dixon, definitely does seem to support the idea that he is aware of the reading cycle that some people go on and how to better support that as he kind of takes you through his narratives. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we're gonna have much to say on these chapters because like there's not a ton from a substantive perspective going on in them, especially compared to some of the previous ones. But I enjoyed them. They're a great little break from the paranoia, except for one moment or two of them.
Yeah.
If there's no more overall thoughts, then we'll go ahead and dive right into chapter 13, which follows Horst and the 2 children headed out to JFK to begin their great journey out to the cornfields of somewhere. It doesn't matter what state in the Midwest they're going to, there's going to be cornfields there. And Maxine decides she's going to ride along with them to go to the airport. Because, and I love this quote, she rides out along to the airport, like, not being clingy or anything, just could do with a nice breeze through the window of the town car, okay? just
Jeez.
This is the very obvious, like, clingy mother not wanting to let go of her kids or wanting to save her like every single moment of them, which really is reinforced by the earlier comment that her greatest fear in life is becoming the Jewish mom. You kind of get it. Yeah.
I think that sentence though actually kind of does some foreshadowing for her behavior in the next couple of chapters, where she's just really not putting up with people's shit.
True.
So I don't know if that was an intentional little bit of foreshadowing, but it definitely feels like, setting us up for like, she's letting go of her kids for an extended period of time. So she's going to have, there's going to be a little bit of inherent agitation that's kind of baked in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so she watches them take off on the plane. And who else should be in the airport but Miss McElmo herself, seeing off Justin, who's going to DEF CON, which is another one of these Pynchon inventions, much like Aggro World and all the stuff from Vineland that I love.
DEF CON's...
Wait, is it?
Yeah, DEF CON's very real. It's
explain. I need some context.
It's a hacking convention in Las Vegas. Happens annually. It's where what would be pejoratively called script kiddies. A lot of them are people who are evenly like penetration testers in various industries to keep IT systems secure. Basically, it's Burning Man about cybersecurity. Essentially, is the kind of,
is this where they do the white hat, black hat stuff, where they have people like you were saying testing security and all that kind of stuff? Is that where all that comes from? I feel like I've heard about that before.
Just to give it a vibe, recommendations for people who are visiting, even if you're not part of the industry or any industry, I guess, is to turn off your phone. Do not carry any electronics. Do not connect to public Wi-Fi at all in Las Vegas at that period of time. You always use a VPN if you're going to use public internet networks, and make sure that are, wearing a triple condom version of common sense protocols.
Wow. It's happening in August this year.
Interesting.
Yeah, at that point in time, it was pretty key, I think, especially compared to these days. But yeah, it's a real thing. And I think Vira's also going, isn't she?
She's going to hand out joints and joints and food.
Okay, yeah.
She's going to be arm popcorn, as Maxine would describe herself.
Mm-hmm.
They have a Twitter, DEF CON Twitter.
Nice.
They do movie nights. Last movie they watched was Looper.
Oh.
This is so wild. I straight up thought that this was an invention of Pynchon.
I did too.
That's crazy. All right. So they're headed off to DEF CON.
A real thing.
A real thing. And this is where we learn that Fiona's been off at anime camp in New Jersey, where they're making machinimas. This is another moment like with the reference to Hideo Kojima several chapters ago, where this really reveals the level of research that Pynchon did. Because I don't think that Pynchon was sitting around watching source filmmaker videos and machinimas on YouTube at some point in his life, but he did uncover that existence, and it includes the fact that it all started with the Quake engine that people could mess around with. So there's another great piece of information that he throws out there that I love. It's being included in, because that was something that I definitely watched a lot of when I was younger, growing up in this era.
Yeah, it's
I think a lot of us probably did, to be honest.
Yeah,
huge part of culture at this point in time.
That's also true. Yeah.
So I honestly, up until you mentioned it, that I have in mind the idea of Thomas Pynchon sitting down to watch Team Fortress sketches. I think it probably happened. Yeah.
You think so, huh?
Not in 2001, but yeah, I think by 2012 or 2013.
By 2012,
probably. Yeah.
Well, like in research, yeah, I could see it. I don't know if he was casually watching them of his own volition, maybe.
It could be,
And
yeah.
the fact
Maybe
he called them
his son was watching.
machinimas.
That's true. He does call them machinimas, which would require you to. Yeah, maybe that. I mean, that just makes me like the guy more. If he was sitting around watching stuff made in Source Filmmaker, that would be pretty cool. But
I mean, we know he has a predilection to cartoons and stuff, so
this is true.
This is kind of an extension of that.
Has Thomas Pynchon watched Meet the Sniper?
Or Red versus Blue.
Yeah, or Red versus Blue. R.I.P. Rooster Teeth.
Yeah.
And Maxine takes a moment in this interaction to ask how things are going in Deep Archer. Only trying to be sociable, understand. How do you guys, I wanted to ask, how do you interpret this comment? Do you interpret her as asking because she's looking for maybe anything else pertinent to Gabriel Ice and Hashlinger's trying to buy it? Or do you view it as her kind of latent addiction to it creeping up in this one instance where she can ask about it again? Because those are the two biggest interpretations I've been able to see online of this question.
I don't know. I think it's kind of a blend of both, maybe. I think there's an inherent drive for her at this point to be asking, at any opportunity to get any information that can, further her understanding of everything. But at the same time, I think she's also apprehensive to ask because she's getting deeper and deeper into this, and she doesn't want to, potentially blow any kind of possible leads that she could have, or sour any relationships that she could mine information from later. So it's kind of a delicate, tightrope of like, I want to ask, but I don't want to come off as being really pushy to get information. So I don't know. It could be either one.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just the fact that there's got to be a general of professional interest, because sure, this is related to Hashlingers, but he's gonna believe Justin and Virva when they're saying that there's all this interest from governments and giant equity firms and all this stuff. Like, this is going to be part of her future, whether she cares about Deep Archer in and of itself or not.
That's also true. It's a good point. Yeah, it's an interesting bit of an interaction from a standpoint of what she might be getting at there. I underlined and I just wrote, sure, Maxine, in the margin, especially with that line about, I'm just trying to be sociable.
Just breaking the ice.
Yeah, just making casual conversation about your hidden deep web virtual reality game out in public, where they are saying this might be the last time it's freely accessible, because after DEF CON we're going to have to really sweep through, which gets back to Will's point about the fact that they don't recommend you access public Wi-Fi while DEF CON is going on. So they part ways at the airport, and Maxine goes to her office where her receptionist Daytona is watching quite an interesting film. It loves nickel defense. Which I don't know what I love more, the description of the movie or the fact that the love interest is literally called Serendipity, spelled Serendypiti.
Oh my god. It's a Hallmark movie, but
yeah.
Just like, I hate it, but it sounds so intriguing at the same time.
It does sound so interesting. And I love the description of who immediately gets this Hakeem revved up to where before log he's dealing with running backs the way in-laws deal with hors d'oeuvres.
To go back to the airport scene, there was something I wanted to bring up. I'm going to read out the quote. A voice comes on the PA, making an announcement in English, though Maxine is suddenly unable to understand a word. The sort of resonant voice in which events are solemnly foretold, not at all a voice she would ever want to be summoned by. It's interesting, I mean, that Maxine isn't able to understand a word. I mean, it's that sometimes happens in airports. What I found most interesting about that quote is that, like, could you imagine being in an airport and then being like, Thomas Pynchon to gate 34, Thomas Pynchon to gate 34? Like, that'd be Thomas Pynchon's like worst nightmare, I'd imagine, is being summoned on a PA system in a large place. I just found that interesting in terms of, it seems to be a bit of an author insert thing on that he kind of puts on Maxine.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any author who would hate that happening to them, it'd be him or J.D. Salinger.
I was gonna say, yeah, him and Salinger, yeah.
I think it's also you can carry that over to just people in general. I can speak for myself. Like I have been summoned over the PA at the airport like that.
Have you?
And I have a last name that is of Arabic descent. And
Hell yeah.
so almost every time I have flown anywhere, I get in big scare quotes randomly pulled to
Nice.
to
Nice.
have my to answer questions and whatnot. I actually
Really
got pulled
cool.
in London. I got pulled into a back room also, which Jesus Christ, that scared the ever loving shit out of me.
That is very, very cool. As that's like the worst version of what I have to deal with coming from a family with very Hebrew names. I just have to usually deal with people horrifically mispronouncing my name.
I get that too. Yeah.
Yeah, in every circumstance possible, which was really cool. Really made me feel normal as a child.
Yeah. I've dealt with that my whole life. It sucks.
It's probably the only time I ever wanted to go to a Hebrew school as as opposed to a regular public school.
See,
But that's a good point.
Saying, I thought that Pynchon that California was hell.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be exactly what he's saying too. He does seem to believe that, whether this particular quote means that or not.
Certainly come up more than once in the book so far.
This is very true. Which, I mean, he's got a point. Everyone out there is working an angle.
Yeah.
The transition though from what I can only imagine is a brief moment of expectation of Love's Nickel Defense by Maxine is that some motherfucker with a white attitude called about 10 minutes ago. And I love how over the top her assistant is.
Daytona is the best.
Daytona is so good. And it turns out that Gabriel Ice has called and left a message to call her back. So she does indeed call that, and Gabriel Ice's first line in this book is, "Are you on a secure line?" Which is quite the way to open up a phone call. But really, this is another instance where someone is trying to pull Maxine into something that she's not particularly interested in being involved in. Gabriel Ice is A, mad that she went and spoke to Talus, and is B, mad at his mother-in-law for publishing the stuff that she does on her website. And so as a result, he is trying to derive some kind of intention out of Maxine, or get her to back off. What did we think about Gabriel Ice's first speaking role? I'll say in the book, he certainly loomed all over the first 150 pages prior.
Yeah, he definitely has. I think I don't want to use the word underwhelming, but it has a sense of like, I feel like Maxine deflates him really fast. I think he tries to come off as this really, tough, scary guy, and he's been built up that way throughout the whole book so far. Mm-hmm. And then, he to come on the phone with "Are you on a secure line?" should be kind of an ominous, kind of threat. But Maxine just kind of like rolls it off and is just like, "Well, yeah, I use it all the time for shopping," and blah blah blah, like not playing into his bullshit, And again, because she's in this kind of irritated mood with her kids being gone and everything like that. So and it also I think plays into the kind of hard boiled detective thing of just genuinely being a smart ass a lot of times, especially to the antagonist. When you're interacting with them. So I think it plays into that.
Yeah, I have no doubt that if in the idealized movie version, because if I could adapt one Pynchon novel into a movie, it'd be Bleeding Edge. In the idealized movie version of this, as soon as he says, "Are you on a secure line?" she rolls her eyes so hard they go back into her skull.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At the sheer audacity of because at this point she doesn't know exactly what all he's involved in. But hearing something like that, I feel like that's the only way that you could respond to it from a standpoint of like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Or who does he think he is?
So I have a bit of a I don't think it's at all I think it's completely grounded in the text theory, but kind
Okay.
of probably is a little bit of a conspiracy corner theory.
We
Ooh.
need an intro music for this.
I know. I need to make a little stinger.
But basically, we're so the way Maxine hears all this, and the way that I think most readers take it at first is, or many cases, is Ice basically trying to come off as like way a much bigger deal than he actually is. Just come off important, like, or a secure line. As Maxine wouldn't well aware, the only people who have secure lines are like government facilities. And the fact that he should know that she would know that, and that really leads me to believe that this is actually just a guy who's popping a bunch of Adderall, who's paranoid about everything.
Oh yeah, 100%.
The everything in this conversation is entirely like scattered speed freak. Like, what about this?
He's always
thing?
sweating.
You think that March hates me? Oh, I know you hate me.
Yeah,
Like,
it's really you despise me.
I don't know if we should take like on a character level it any further than that.
Yeah,
that's
no,
how it
I agree with
me.
your interpretation. Yeah, 100%. That's how it comes off. Yeah, it's so good, and it is a good depiction of just what it's like to talk to somebody who's in somewhat of a manic state as well.
I've been listening to the audiobook for this book, and I think the lady that does it on Audible does like a very like high pitched nasally voice for Gabriel Ice,
Interesting.
which is definitely it's an interesting it was an interesting creative choice because he comes across as very like childish and nerdy and not intimidating or imposing in the least in the audiobook. I don't know if that's I don't know how important that necessarily is considering it's not Pynchon himself making that creative choice, but I did think it was worth mentioning that she made that choice.
Well, he's certainly written like the big kid and the small kid sandbox.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Especially, I really love the end of their interaction to go off of what you just said, the big kid and the little kid sandbox of, good to know. It might help you in the future to stay away from my wife too. Yeah. By the way, only for
those
Maxine.
Those are my trucks. You can't play with those trucks.
Only for Maxine to completely undercut him as she's doing through the whole conversation, and just go, "Wait a minute, little buddy. what a nasty piece of work this guy's. You got me all wrong. Like, she's cute as a bug's ear and all that. Just try and keep some distance. Be professional." And then I love her last line of talk slower. Try to write this down.
Just like you dumb bastard. Shut up.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings us to a question I have. Is Maxine's joke trying to undercut his pretension, like actually hitting on something? Because otherwise, why else would he mention be professional? Yeah. He could just be telling her off for, being around his wife because, hey, that's off limits. But be professional? Come on.
I mean, I feel like when a lot of people are acting irrationally, especially in a setting where like money's being exchanged or like at work, which technically from Gabriel Ice's perspective probably thinks that she is working for his wife, which, by extension is working for him. Mm-hmm. That can we be professional? Can we act like professionals here? Is a very common refrain. It's entirely possible that this is just how he treats his employees.
More than likely that's the case, yeah.
As a result, to have someone for the first time ever provide some kind of resistance to him, his response of, "Can we be professional here?" Meanwhile, he's acting like he's high on coke. Like, it is that's the way that I take that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
After that scene, we get Rocky Slodgiot checking in. I don't think that's a Dunstan checks in reference, but after our
I don't
ad
think
read
so.
last book, it's just the first thing I thought of when I saw checks in next to a character's name. That really has no bearing on this interpretation at all. He is calling her because he wants to meet at a place called the Omega Diner, where once Maxine arrives, she is introduced to Igor Dashkov and his two children, who prefer to go by Demios and Phobos. This is quite an interesting quadruplet of people that she's walked into.
Yeah.
Between Rocky being the Italian mobster sort of pastiche, and then who seems to be a straight-laced Russian businessman, but his two insane children sitting at the table reading out rap lyrics to their
Playing
favorite their favorite Russian rap artist and playing Doom is quite apparent. Did we have any thoughts on these characters?
I thought it was a great kind of play on the, meeting with the Russian mob type trope that comes about in almost every like conspiracy thriller that has been written in the last 50 years. There's always that scene where you go and it's always supposed to be really tense and like, they're always dangerous and all that. But here it's just this dude with his weird, probably high school aged kids who refer to themselves by the names of Mars's moons.
Well, that's where Doom takes place.
Playing Doom on a Game Boy.
Yeah. Which is an anachronism, because Doom didn't come out on the Game Boy for a few years after this.
There's a few anachronisms in these chapters I noticed, and that was definitely one of them.
That's an interesting.
But now you can run Doom on everything. So
this is true. You can run Doom on like a freaking lava lamp,
pregnancy
probably,
test.
if you want. Can you?
Someone did it, yeah.
That's insane. Why would a pregnancy test have that much technology put into it?
It's just a digital. It's like a digital display. That's all you really need, I think.
That's
economies
wild.
of scale.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we can stop.
Maybe.
I think we've reached the point where all further innovation is just kind of pointless in the grand scheme of things. At any rate, the funny thing about Cody. Yeah, Will.
No, that was going to be a stupid joke. You please continue.
Okay.
I want to hear this stupid joke.
It's just going to be that I think that if we're not being distracted from the urine accidentally trickling down to your hands, if you can't at least play like a little hockey game on your
little
pregnancy
blades
test.
of steel.
What are we even doing?
Maybe
What
Snake.
is humanity?
That's fair. Yeah, I'm all for technical innovation for fun things, and like maybe things that could be considered stupid, but perhaps the rest of it not so much. So getting back, this episode has an interesting energy.
It really does.
Getting back to your point, Cody, about like the meeting with the Russian mob thing, I think it's interesting that Pynchon is also playing on that by pretty distinctly saying he's not mob affiliated.
Yeah, very explicitly saying that.
At the end, he leaves, and then Maxine's like, "What is his deal?" And then even Rocky is like, "I don't know. I've tried figuring it out, but I can't."
And they ate 2 chocolate cream pies on top of that too.
Yeah.
Undercut all of the seriousness of the scene.
His children have metal teeth. Like, it's so wild. So wild. As another point of information for the listener, the musical artist that his 2 kids really like is a real musical artist.
Yep.
You can go and listen to his music. It's not my thing personally, but it's interesting.
I didn't listen to it yet.
It's hip hop with a reggae flair in Russian is really the easiest way to describe it. It's all right. I'm sure he's got plenty of fans in Russia that are
Russian
probably
hip-hop.
just like those kids.
Russian hip hop, as much respect as any other music genre.
Yeah.
It's a culture. just
There's
seems like a
good
one-off
hip-hop all
joke
over the
to
world,
us.
for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's one of the older hip hop traditions that isn't rooted in, the Black diaspora. It's a cool little subculture.
There you go. Do you have any recommendations for the listener to engage with?
Absolutely not.
Oh,
I do
okay.
not listen to it. It is yeah. It's not a endorsement. It's just, I get it. People like it.
Oh man,
That's all.
yeah. I don't know what I would do if two children started not only hip hop like doing an impersonation of a hip hop artist in front of me, but one of them was doing the lyrics and the other was making DJ sound effects with their mouth.
Because it wasn't described as beatboxing; it was just described as DJ sounds,
yeah,
which is just like
DJ
scratching.
sound effects. Yeah, so literally one kid's doing that, and the other one is rapping in Russian, and I'm just sitting there. Like, just the mind fuck that I feel like you'd have as Maxine sitting in this diner seat. Two people are eating a whole pie. This giant Russian guy is asking you about Bernie Madoff. The person who called you here hasn't said a word the whole time. And there's these two children with metal teeth rapping at you and making sound effects. Like, it would, and then you look to make it even worse. When you look at the financial data, when he passes the folder over, it's a perfectly diagonal line from
stock
the
image.
yeah, exactly, from the bottom of the graph all the way up to the top. Like that has got to be one of the strangest combination of circumstances of any Pynchon character in a scene that we've read through so far for this podcast.
I was thinking when I was reading this, I was like, it seems like this, and there's one more coming up that we'll get to that I really would love a film of this to be done. In the right hands, it would be absolutely hilarious.
Oh my god, the closest that I feel like we've seen filmed is the pancake scene in Inherent Vice, where Bigfoot keeps screaming in Japanese in between their conversation.
So yeah, I have just one asterisk to add to that image. Apologies, I was laughing too much to say. No, each of the children, in between their mouth noises, presumably, have eaten 2 pies.
Yes.
The whole time they're talking, both of them are shoving chocolate pie into their face.
Oh my god, it's so much.
As far as I understand, though, the actual Bernie Madoff scams were actually straight lines. I think that part is real, which is amazing.
Yeah, the fact that it took as long as it took to catch that dude doing what he was doing is astonishing.
I did do some cursory research on that. I'm sure most of the listeners at this point know who Bernie Madoff is, but if you somehow don't, he has the most ironic name for a Ponzi scheme artist of anybody in history. But he was a guy who used to be a securities trader. He was at one point the president of the NASDAQ stock exchange. Yeah. And at a certain point in his life, it isn't clear when he necessarily started doing this, but he started engaging in a Ponzi scheme, in which case he would take a bunch of money. He would purport these amazing investment turnarounds. He'd pay out original investors to give some kind of legitimacy to what he was doing, and then it all kind of sort of collapsed. He started out with a penny stock firm that he grew into a massive company. His Ponzi scheme, by the time that it had been fully sort of uncovered and engineered, it was estimated to be worth about $64.8 billion as far as how much money he stole. The SEC also, this is true to what Maxine brings up in the scene, the confusion over looking at a perfect graft and being like, the SEC hasn't done anything. They just kind of didn't in real life.
Yeah.
They barely investigated the guy, and a lot of people, as early as I think 1998, if I remember correctly, were telling the SEC, I think you need to look into this guy's company because something doesn't seem right. Yeah. But he wasn't actually convicted until 2008. That was when
his kids are the ones that busted him.
Yeah, he was finally arrested and sentenced to 150 years in prison. That was
Mhm.
the sentence he was given. And he was sentenced to give a restitution of $170 billion to the people that he scammed. Obviously, that was impossible. So he died in prison. He died in
A couple
2020,
years ago, right?
like 2022 or 2023.
Something
I want
like
to
that.
say.
Yeah, not too long ago.
Yeah, quite an interesting just piece of history. And just the fact
It
that
really, really shines a pretty bad light on the SEC when you think about the fact that and Enron happened within like what 5 years of each other.
yeah, well, and then not just that, but then the whole financial collapse in
And
'08.
the housing bubble and all that kind of bullshit. Yeah.
Which was revealed to be a whole corrupt institution from the top down, as far as how that
Yeah.
happened, including
Yeah.
the regulatory authorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
What they're
SEC
doing
had
over there,
the SEC had a hard 20 years from 1990 to 2010. Oh man, yeah, just quite an amazing scene overall. I think we've kind of exhausted. Does anyone have anything else they want to bring up about it?
That's probably my second favorite scene in these 3 chapters.
It's great, yeah. So Maxine decides to soak off the weird vibes in the Deseret pool. I love that she's still doing this, even though she's presumably in her 40s. She's sneaking into the service elevator
Yeah.
of this building that she loved when she was a kid to go swim in their pool. And who should she run into but Reg, who just is there. I love the moment that she recognizes him, where he describes this as the greasy dimness of the service the service corridors of the building. I feel like that's just such a perfect way to describe kind of how the staff of these places, have to live versus the people who actually occupy them. Just as a brief note on Pynchon's usage of words. And this is where we also learn that Gabriel Ice owns the Deseret. So another paranoia alert. But Reg is basically saying that he's out. He's good. He's gone far enough. He's really not interested in continuing any further down this pathway. He's going to go try and run away and survive somewhere where Gabriel Ice might not find him. Someone broke into his apartment, stole all of his film canisters except for the stuff that he had hidden, and so he's checking out. And I love the quote here where it says, "If a .com had an immortal soul,
Yes.
Reg, strangely distant, as if already calling back out the window of some westbound conveyance, hash slingers would be lost." This really goes back to what we talked about, I think 2 episodes ago now, with the venture capital firms and kind of the soul of the internet getting corrupted by power. Google's slogan used to be "Don't be evil," or their mission statement, sorry, Will, used to be "Don't be evil."
Thank you.
That's obviously not the case anymore. Facebook has routinely been dragged in front of Congress to yeah, you're welcome, to testify to the dangerous effect that it's had on politics, how Instagram has had a very debilitating effect on particularly young women. TikTok is getting banned by Congress for reasons that what they're saying they're doing it for is maybe not as legitimate, but there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about TikTok. It is such a damning quotation that rings with a lot of truth. That these companies, as we talked about a few episodes ago, started with good intentions and then just all fell apart into something else completely.
Well, and then he also kind of predicts the future of online, video sharing and how that's going to shape itself out.
Yeah, you want to read that quote?
Very prescient, yeah. So right after that, he says, "Ain't like I was ever Alfred Hitchcock or something. You can watch my stuff till you're cross-eyed, and there will never be any deeper meaning. I see something interesting, I shoot it is all. Future of film, if you want to know. Someday, more bandwidth, more video files up on the internet. Everybody will be shooting everything. Way too much to look at. Nothing will mean shit. Think of me as the prophet of that." That is YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, that's all of that in a nutshell. And you could really make the argument that streaming services are getting to that point as well, where it's just, flood the channel with as much content as possible. Don't worry about the value of that content. Just get it out there and see what happens with it.
Yeah, that's what most of the internet is now. Just let me vomit all of this stuff into public, basically. Which I fully understand the irony of as we record a podcast.
I'd like to think there's a modicum of substance that we bring to what we're doing. I don't know if there is. I just like to think that.
I think there is, but it is it is of a similar degree of I'll say cultural symptom that we all gathered on one social media platform and decided to create this version of an entertainment platform for people.
Well, we should really be glad about it, because the truth that this is the same problem that's been going on since, the mid-1800s. And we've really had the sense of meaninglessness. We've just made everyone welcome to this culture of self-destruction.
Everyone's invited to the party now instead of the elite.
Yep. Yeah, everyone, that's a perfect way to put it, Cody. Everyone's invited to the party now. The very fun party of malaise.
Yep.
It used to be, especially just for the super rich or aristocratic people. Oh Lord. Any thoughts on chapter 13 before we move into 14?
I don't have too much to say. The fellows already know this. I did go to the inspiration for the Deseret building whenever I was in New York City a couple weeks ago. It's called the Apthorpe. Security there is pretty tight. I did notice somebody trying to get in, and they had to talk to the door guy for a long time. And it is a very impressive building. It's very imposingly Gothic. Somebody on the Instagram when I posted the pictures described it similarly.
Did you try to sneak into a service elevator?
Did you go swimming in the roof?
No, I didn't. I'm not 100%. I don't think it's a 1-to-1 comparison between the Deseret and the Apthorpe. Looking at the Apthorpe, there's a central courtyard. So it's not just one solid, all around building. And I'm not 100. I didn't really have anyone to ask, if there was a pool on the roof. Looking at the building, it doesn't strike me as a building with a pool on the roof. But I'm not an expert on New York City in general and that building in particular. I would actually kind of be surprised if there was an actual pool on the roof. But yeah, it was interesting to go. It wasn't too far from where I was staying. And it is an impressive building. I would recommend if you're in New York City and you've already kind of seen all the major stuff, and you're a Pynchon fan, it is worth seeing if it's not too out of your way.
Yeah, some of the photos you shared with us there, it's an imposing facade, even if it's just an influence on the Deseret in terms of architecture. It's understandable.
Any other thoughts on chapter 13 before we move on to 14?
I like the last line that Reg has where he says, "Don't worry, I used to think that as long as I could see it through the viewfinder, it couldn't hurt me. So it took a while, but now I know different. You happy? Dissolution child written all over him." Just nice, kind of bittersweet way to end the chapter and provide a little insight on Reg's life. But I think that's a really interesting viewpoint, for lack of a better term, of that's if I'm only looking at it through a lens, then it's not real and it can't hurt me. So it's kind of a weird safety blanket.
Yeah, well, I think that's also certainly when you talk about him being prophetic in his sort of future analysis of something like YouTube coming along. I think a lot of people have the exact same thought now.
That's true.
Yeah, I'll just record this and put it online, and nothing is going to happen to me. How many times has that been the downfall of somebody since this whole thing became democratized? I think probably Reg's thinking about it maybe a bit different than, say, we would now, but certainly a similar thing. All right, so chapter 14. we learn that one of the mystery vendors that Hashlingers is using is a fiber optic supply company called Dark Linear Solutions, which, boy, if there was ever an evil name for a company,
Yeah, right.
Dark Linear would be one of them. It's very similar to what I was doing the Promise research for last week's episode, and I came up with the Inside Corp Whack and Hunt. That just sounds so evil.
It does.
And Dark Linear is certainly the same thing. And this causes Maxine to wonder why Hashlingers needs so much fiber.
And why they're hiding it.
Yeah, this is a real piece of history. Fiber fell out of favor pretty quickly. And, you know, there was less of a reason to keep purchasing a lot of it, especially after the dot-com bubble when all these companies sort of went belly up and left. There was even less of a reason to be buying a lot of it. It took a long time for fiber to have any sort of resurgence, kind of. Like Google started providing fiber services, I want to say maybe like 5-6 years ago.
Something like that, yeah.
But there was a massive period in time between kind of this period and now more recent history where just nobody used it because it was too expensive and really wasn't worthwhile to what was considered, you know, a necessity. So there's certainly some real history to why Maxine would be confused by that and why she would not understand why he's hiding it. So that being said, Maxine decides that she's gonna try and uncover more information by talking to Talus. So she calls Talus up, and then she just goes, "Nope, there's nothing about this that seems like you need to look into it. Please don't look into it any further. The company basically doesn't exist. I wouldn't worry about it at all. It's okay." And so Maxine decides this is indeed something that she has to look further into. I also love the opening paragraph when she goes down to the office building.
Yeah.
Where it says, Dark Linear Solutions is a hip-looking chrome and neon establishment in the Flatiron District, which, by the way, Flatiron Building, it's the best building in New York. And anyone who says otherwise can shove it. In the E-rated video game of this, it sells Enkinsia smoothies and seaweed panini instead of doped silica to feed depraved fat pipe fantasies that still may linger from the era recently ended. Oh man, there's so many pieces of writing like that in this book that draw upon that heritage of detective novels or hard-boiled novels and just really give this book an extra edge that I love. Additionally, I just love the as we keep talking about the redevelopment of the city and the gentrification and all of that, saying that, you know, in another world, how this building looks, they should be serving like some weird yuppie health food, which has taken on a different tone. Where if you go into a lot of stuff in these gentrifying areas now, like a lot of them have neon signs, and they'll have like neon signs mounted in like a wall of like fake ivy or something like that.
Yeah,
and, like it just I was struck reading through it this time versus previous times that I've read through the book, how the kind of design that she's mentioning just in this brief paragraph has been co-opted by the exact kind of things that she say the building should be. Just kind of a random note that I came across. Not saying that Thomas Pynchon is some kind of a prophet in that regard, but these things enter the public consciousness. And so, sure enough, as she's about to leave to go walk inside, who should she see but Talus herself leaving in quite an ensemble outfit, a tight leopard print jumpsuit and Chanel Havana shades over her eyes instead of up on her head, acting like a hairband. Yeah, so she's there. She's like hooting and hollering at somebody, and then eventually she gets into a car with a strange man carrying a briefcase, and they speed off. Maxine decides that she's going to follow them, and when they eventually reach their other destination, she just walks into another building, and Maxine doesn't follow her, but is very curious what all this may point to. Do we have any thoughts on this scene from a kind of overview perspective?
I love the follow him in the cab kind of trope that this is playing with.
Yeah.
Which again, we talked last chapter about the meeting with the Russian mobsters and how that gets turned on its head. And this does the same thing. You have Maxine gets in this car randomly and has the guy follow him, and the dude just ends up getting really into it, which I love. Like, that's probably my favorite part of that whole little scene is just when he's like,
offers her a PI rate.
Yeah. Where next?
Yeah.
Like, he's just having a good time. Like, this is probably the highlight of his whole year at this point.
If I was a cab driver, that would be the highlight of my year for sure.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So it's a fun play on that whole thing, and I love her interaction with the doorman at the building, where she can tell he's new and plays off of that and uses that to her advantage to get the information that she wants. And it's great. It's a fun scene.
It is. That was one thing I noted too. That interaction with the doorman is just another example of how smart she is.
Mm-hmm.
Just the fact that she has this defunct business card on her for moments like this. She knows exactly how to play all the angles in this conversation to get the information from the doorman, and then is just sort of able to get what she needs, and then kind of leaves. The other aspect of the scene that I love is just, again, the stuff that Pynchon is talking about with like the gentrification and redevelopment of the city, how all of that just is so present in the background, just constantly, from a standpoint of, there's the quote here, they follow the ponderous gas gobbler all the way over to FDR and proceed uptown, exiting at 96th, continuing north on First Avenue into a fringe neighborhood no longer Upper East Side and not quite East Harlem, where you might have once gone to visit your drug dealer or arrange a compensated evening rendezvous, but which is now showing signs of gentrification. And then later on, in the very next paragraph, it goes, the reconfigured heavy pickup pauses near a building newly converted, according to a sign tastefully draped across its upper stories, to condos running $1 million or so per bedroom, and then takes about an hour to park. So it's another symptom of gentrification. Like, the building is openly advertising how expensive its condos are. There's no more parking. And then time was, muttered the cabbie, leaving something like that on the street up there? You'd have to be insane, man. Now everybody's afraid to touch it because it might belong to some badass who thinks with his Glock. Just these constant mentions of just like the city's changing, things are afoot, things aren't the way that they used to be, something's going on. It's so great, and I love the fact that I think this is the first time they've used the term gentrification in the whole book.
I think it's the first time it's been explicitly said. Yeah,
exactly. So just as like Pynchon cleverly and smartly including it in the book, but avoiding that term until just now. It's one of my favorite aspects of it, because especially now, having read through some of the oral history of the time, surprisingly from Meet Me in the Bathroom of all places, this is very much what it was like to try and exist in New York during that time.
Yeah, and it all goes back to the city as a character.
Yeah. So then Maxine asked to be taken off to Zabar's, and I don't know, maybe she needed some locks. I'm not sure why she picked that place of all. But after that, who should she get a call from again but Rocky John?
Man, this guy.
this man has now invited her out to a karaoke bar, not just with his wife, but his partner Spud Loiterman, which is, oh my god. What a name!
I have to wonder where that name. Like, it sounds like it's a play on like couch potato or something. That's the only thing I could think to connect with that.
Yeah, it's
What a fucking name! God, it's so good.
Just like an absolute stooge. Like
This guy is just the most obnoxious fucking idiot.
Yeah,
just from his name.
It's entirely possible that maybe Spud lost on a sports bet to Rocky, and so now the venture capital firm belongs to Rocky, and he just decided to use it as an off-ramp to go legit.
Yeah.
But keeps the guy around for appearances or something. But yeah, they're gonna head off to a Korean karaoke bar, which really does reinforce, as Maxine notes, the fact that they're called streetlight people. Given that I I don't know if I've ever been to a karaoke bar where somebody at some point hasn't sang "Don't Stop Believing."
I think attempted would be the better descriptor there.
Yeah,
That's a tough one, and
fair.
if you don't have the right the right capabilities, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, no, and I hate that song anyway. So if anything, it's nice to hear people butcher it.
I hope Steve Perry's not listening.
I'm sorry, Steve Perry. You came into my place of work not too long ago to get coffee. That's actually true, by the way.
Really? I was about to ask.
Yeah,
fucking wild.
Journey played a concert at a venue like 2 blocks away from the cafe that I operate in. And so like several of the members of the band and their like management team came in to get coffee for everybody.
That's wild.
Yeah, I could not have cared less. It was really a moment of odd interest from a standpoint of is that
Steve Perry?
Is that Steve Perry?
Yes. Okay.
Why are you here? And then all of a sudden it made so much sense why there was a bunch of septuagenarians that were wandering around the city for the last 6 hours that I was super confused by, because that is not the demographic that normally finds their way into the store I work in. So she gets dressed up because, and this feels like maybe she was, I don't know if Rocky was trying to set her up as in like, don't dress fancy. And then when she gets down there, they make fun of her because she's like going to be the least, rich person there. But she clearly picks up on the fact that she does need to dress fancy. She wears a piece of clothing that she got at a real place in New York called Feline's Basement, where you can get like off-cycle or previous seasons sort of top-tier fashion pieces for discounted. And when she arrives, we're treated to quite the group of people. It's not just Rocky and his partner Spud and and some other people from sort of their industry, but there is also an assembled group of Koreans there. Which this whole thing, I can't. Spud's girlfriend Latita assorted out-of-town clients in for the weekend, and as well as a small party of actual Koreans wearing, possibly as ironic fashion statements, shiny yellowish outfits from the north made of vinylon, a fiber derived, unless Maxine is hearing this wrong, from coal, who have wandered off a tour bus and are growing increasingly uneasy about finding their way back to it. I did some research into this too. Vinylon is a real fabric, in case the listener did not know this. Vinylon is a fabric that you really only is found in North Korea. It was an attempt by the government there to create their own textile to follow their philosophy of self-reliance, or juche as they call it. It's terrible. It's not a good clothing. It was originally made out of anthracite and limestone, that's where the coal connection that Maxine is making is coming from. However, it required too much electricity to actually make it in that way for it to be worth any money at all for the quality of the fabric that they got out of it. So that was when they switched to making it out of polyvinyl alcohol, or PVA. And this was a fun thing that I found. It was once called by the North Korean administration the King of Fibers, and was featured in children's cartoons to teach them how successful and independent the country was. This crappy plasticky fabric that they have, it was quite a big deal over there for quite some time. I also love the idea that potentially these aren't North Koreans, but South Koreans making fun of the North Korean people by wearing their crappy clothes. It's not clear which one it is, but I think it'd be funnier if it was the latter interpretation.
Definitely could be.
And the way Pynchon describes the clothes isn't exactly how they look in real life, but it really does come off like they're wearing like pleather clothing that's bright yellow, which is really funny to me. So they all start to get into. So Maxine, after they all get into the karaoke place, starts talking to Cornelia, who's Rocky's wife. When all of a sudden they are joined by a few other people that Maxine knows. Felix Beaugenou is back from her days investigating the fraud in Montreal or in French Canada. It was it Ottawa, Montreal, or Ottawa, one of those two.
Montreal.
Montreal, yeah, from a few chapters ago. Which is another. It should be a moment of paranoia alert, but it isn't for Maxine. It might be the only time where one of these weird coincidences has happened, and it hasn't caused her to get freaked out by anything. But he then tells her that that he's trying to go legit. He's created an even better software against his old scam that he's now trying to sell to people. Actually, I love Maxine's response of, "You're trying to go legit." Oh, like Michael Corleone. I understand. No problem.
Yeah, I do want to take a second to highlight Felix's haircut.
Yeah.
Which is described as it says he's sporting a strange do, which is either a triple-digit power haircut carefully designed to lull observers into false complacency with their own appearance until it's too late, or else he cut it himself and fucked up.
It's a pretty good way to describe a haircut. Yeah. Oh my god. So yeah, he's hoping that Maxine will put in a good word for them with Rocky to get them the money they need. And then, sure enough, they start doing songs. And this, I think, is probably my favorite joke of this chapter. No sooner is the karaoke machine powered up than the Koreans have formed a queue at the sign-up book. In conversation, Fatic or Profitable must compete for a while with More Than a Feeling, Bohemian Rhapsody, and Dancing Queen. On the screen, behind lyrics in both Korean and English, appear enigmatic tape clips. Masses of Asian people running around in faraway city streets and plazas, human kaleidoscopes filling the fields of gigantic sports arenas, low-res footage from Korean soap operas and nature documentaries, and other strange peninsular visuals, often having little to do with the song or the machine or its lyrics, sometimes offering peculiar disconnects there between. It's
such a great description of that kind of thing.
This whole image of like a mixed group of people, some of which are wearing these very high fashion, expensive outfits. Some are wearing the middle, midline clothing tiers, and then these Koreans wearing plastic yellow suits, singing like freaking karaoke staples while just completely idiosyncratic video plays as a rear projection. Is just an amazing set of visual circumstances for this whole gag.
I think the beauty of it, though, before we get too much farther into it, is keeping all of this in mind while Maxine has the conversations that she has going forward, because all of this is happening in the background of every conversation going forward in this chapter. Yeah,
which very similar to the diner one.
Yeah,
of just, you gotta imagine that like she's just having a weird couple days. Just her kids are gone. She's completely unmoored from reality, and all of the circumstances that she's dealing with certainly seem to point towards the fact that her life is just not normal right now until her family comes back and there's some order restored. But she handles it all so well.
Yeah.
And then what is maybe the most absurd joke to set up the first song of the book is that Cornelia gets up to sing a song called Massapequa, which is the second soprano showstopper from Amy and Joey, an off-Broadway musical about Amy Fisher that's been running since 1994 to packed houses, giving it a sort of neo-country music feel. Cornelia now swaying, drenched in a salmon spot, in front of a screen showing koalas, wombats, and Tasmanian devils, proceeds to belt out And then on goes the lyrics. This is not a real play or a real musical.
I wish it was.
Sadly.
I wish
The
it was
most
too.
unhinged, crazy fucking thing ever. Like, for listeners who aren't fully aware, because this wasn't the biggest news story of all time, but in a nutshell, it was Amy Fisher and Joey Buttafuoco. She was having an affair with him. And then at one point she showed up at his door and shot his wife. His wife lived. But like to create a fucking musical out of that scenario and then have these like random marsupials playing in the background. Oh my god.
My favorite detail of that isn't the juxtaposition of the song and what it's about with the backing visuals. It's the fact that Amy Fisher tried to kill Mary Jo Buttafuoco in 1992, and this this musical has been running since 1994 to 2001, which means that
good?
not only is it that successful, it only took them 2 years to turn the shooting into a Broadway musical. It's just so ridiculous.
Well, and it's I don't know quite enough about recent musical history. It feels very pointed to have this absurd premise and then to have such an utterly nothing song. Like, is it just another Andrew Lloyd Webber put down, or is it something deeper?
Because it could be.
It's such a by the numbers, like, I want love song.
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, I want whatever. It's just so.
I mean, is there
so
just a shortage
insipid.
of good Broadway musicals in the early 90s?
Yeah, what are people getting out of this?
I guess it was Waitress the early 90s.
I don't know.
It might
Rent
have
was early 90s, right?
I know it was the 90s for sure.
It was the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Waitress was trying to look it up.
And it looks like it was 2016.
Yeah.
Oh,
Waitress
wow.
was much later.
That's way more recent than I thought it was. Man, I don't know. That's a good point. It could be an Andrew Lloyd Webber put down for sure. That would make a lot of sense. I mean, it could also be that the case itself was such a nothing burger that it was weird that it became such a big deal in the public eye for like 6 months as it was, that they don't have anything to go off of, so they're just coming with these generic songs. But given that I do not like Andrew Lloyd Webber, I'm gonna side with your interpretation, Will, and say yeah, it's a put down to Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Take that.
I'm sure he's wiping his tears with $500 bills. Man's made a lot of money off of his musicals.
Just as an aside, compliments to Pynchon, as often are due, for figuring out a way to actually include sort of neo-country music feel in this show tune. Because, yeah, I mean, it reads like a Carrie Underwood song, or what's her name?
Yeah, that's true.
Very true.
One of the 90s.
Like a Miranda Lambert
singers. Yes, thank you. Miranda Lambert's exactly what I was thinking of.
Yeah. And I think you and I are in agreement on this, Will, if I remember correctly from previous times where we've talked about the songs, in that we are not particular fans of these songs that are included in a lot of these books. This is one where I'm perfectly okay with this being here. Between what you've brought up with how it's encoded well to a neo-country thing, to the joke of it being present, it feels much more grounded in that, like, there's a reason for this to be here from a standpoint of the joke, just beyond, I like weird songs, which feels like mostly why a lot of them end up in his novels.
I mean, I think I like them in general a little more than you, but this one is definitely one of the least absurd instances, even if
Yeah.
the kind of world that it makes sense is absolutely insane.
So true. Yeah, I mean, I also appreciate the fact that it took 152 pages for one of Pynchon's songs to even show up.
Yeah,
That's got to be a
a lot of
record.
restraint there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, not that I wouldn't want to see Pynchon interpret new metal into his
Oh
books
shit!
to match the time period. I guess you could say certain aspects of Limp Bizkit are Pynchonian from a standpoint of their absurdity. But
That's a conversation for a bonus episode. I think we can debate the merits of Limp Bizkit's inherent Pynchonianism.
oh yeah, there's no inherent benefit to anything Limp Bizkit ever made, but you could make a case that the inherent absurdism is somewhat Pynchonian. Oh man. So after quite a performance, Cornelia gets down off of the stage, and they end up going to the. They end up and in a conversation with one another that's pretty fun. Initially there was some tension between the two of them because she potentially thought that that Rocky was sleeping with her. This is like a mistress situation, but now that that's sort of been put aside, they have this great exchange that I love, where it says, Cornelia puzzled, but you're Jewish? Oh, sure. Practicing? No, I know how to do it pretty good by now. I suppose I meant a certain gift for finding bargains. Should be written into my DNA, I know, but somehow I still forget to fondle material or study the tags, and sometimes, lowering her voice and pretending to look around for disapproval, I have even paid retail? Cornelia pretending to gasp, faux paranoid. Please don't tell anyone, but I have actually now and then discussed the price of an item to a shop. Yes, sometimes, incredibly, they've even brought it down 10%, nearly 30 once. But that was only the one time at Bloomingdale's back in the 80s, though. The memory is still vivid. It's such a fun exchange between the two of them. I'm a big fan. We get a description of something called a soju wallbanger. I don't know if that would be good or bad.
I have no idea. It sounds like a play on. It's obviously a play on a Harvey Wallbanger, but I don't know what the difference would be.
Well, the difference would be if we follow the thread, it would be soju instead of vodka.
Okay,
soju,
yeah.
a rice wine, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I don't know. I don't particularly love a Harvey Wallbanger, but I feel like soju might be worse than that. It's available not just in glasses, but also pitchers. They're getting pitchers of cocktail at this place.
Oh God!
Which is quite crazy. It says Koreans are now horizontal on couches or when vertical, singing with their ankles crossed. And then there's teenagers in the corner playing Dark Eden. There's so much happening in this freaking karaoke bar.
This would work so well as a film. Jesus Christ.
God! And there's just a bunch of cigar smoke hanging over the whole thing for some reason. Oh my God! And then Rocky gets deeply invested in performing Volare, which, if you've never attended a karaoke bar or a party where karaoke happens, listener, there is always one person who does this.
If you're there long enough, you will witness this happen. Yes.
Who feels the need to really just put it all into their performance as if this is going to be their American Idol moment. At the last dinner party I was at where that happened, the song in question was "Tower of Song" by Leonard Cohen.
Oh wow.
It was very interesting to watch someone do all 8 minutes of that.
Wow.
In a very, very grandiose performance. Yeah, no, it definitely is quite a commitment. One that only a grad school student could make.
Yeah, okay, there it is.
And then Spud gets up there and he messes up the lyrics to Africa.
I think that just needs to be the way the song is sung from now on.
You
It's
want it to be
better. It's objectively better.
I left my brains down in Africa. And then the fact that that's literally what it says on the screen, as Spud responds with, shows that this is a karaoke bar with very little ability to translate songs into English for their lyric.
And if we're really being honest with ourselves, Africa
Mhm.
is a song where the lyrics actually mean anything. So
That's
they might as well
definitely
be.
true.
No,
I left
so
my
true.
brains.
Yeah, it might as well be.
Hopefully Steve Lukather is not listening.
Yeah, and I love again the returning gag of what's playing on the screen, where if you were expecting herds on the Serengeti, instead here's silent clips from the second season of the Korean TV hit Gag Concert, mugging studio audience laughter. Enough smoke in the room now that images on the screen are pleasantly smeared. So it's like it's this room choked with cigar smoke where people are drinking cocktails out of pitchers. Somebody's poorly singing Africa, and there's teenagers in the corner playing MMOs. It's just, it feels like this is almost like Pynchon gave himself a challenge to write like the most absurd like scene that he possibly could with mounting absurdity the longer it goes on, where really if you get into each sentence here, there's just something else he throws out there about what's happening in this Korean karaoke bar.
It's a real fever dream just happening all at once.
It really is. It really is.
And then
could this be a commentary on
just lovely cultural exchange there? Everybody share little bits of information. Like Sitpal means self in Korean. When
and then yeah, go ahead, Will.
Just there's no reason for it, at least implied. Like obviously Maxine's in conversation with people, but there's no reason that they would be bringing this up. Why did they even come in?
Yeah, I love the way that it's introduced. Of Maxine has been in a lengthy, though inconclusive, discussion with one of the strayed Korean bus passengers about the number 18 in the name of this Norabang. And then she tells them about gematria, which is, if you don't know, each letter of the Jewish alphabet has a numerical value, and so that has a different meaning in certain contexts of Judaism. And then all of a sudden, it says, this intercultural dialogue is disrupted by commotion from the men's room. To which Maxine feels the need to check in on of everybody in this room.
Well, and I've started to question when there is like a random moment of Maxine just feeling she should do something. Is this all bladder related?
Yeah, I mean, she said that she has always trusted her bladder as far as where it leads her. So
bladder intuition.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if she needs to go, something's going to happen that's going to help her out somehow. Will, for some reason, I feel like you might have something to add on the tables versus CSS conversation that follows
I was
here.
thinking the same thing, yeah. I know there's a lot going on in that joke, and I don't have the wherewithal to understand all of it, so...
Honestly, I mean, I understand what's going to... I think, like I said, the Pynchon Wiki goes a little bit too deep into interpreting it. Because, yeah, basically, versus CSS come down to the argument of whether all of the formatting should be done in the document containing the text of a website, or if it should be separated out into a separate modular system. And that's oversimplifying it because you can put CSS in the text. But basically, you have to, when you're writing when you're writing a website, you used to have to say, okay, this part is going to be placed at this point in the page, and so this will come before the next part. And that feels like it kind of makes sense from a naive point of view. The issue is that, like, a sidebar that has, like, homepage, recent updates. I'm imagining, like, Wikipedia or the Pynchon wiki, just as an example of, like, an image. And then you get into weird circumstances where you have to, like, in the middle of writing the text of whatever the content of the page is, you have to interrupt it with random features because of the way that tables worked. Were literally like, if you were, that they were made to be like a grid of numbers on a document. They were not meant to be formatting, but that was all that people had in HTML for a very long time, before CSS was really standardized in a way that could be used to actually organize page elements. And so I most read this as just stupid flame war stuff. Just stupid people not wanting to update, or from their perspective, stupid people insisting that the good old way is not good enough and getting mad at each other over something that really, really doesn't matter, except for like edge cases, like some accessibility stuff and long-term website maintenance things. This is really, I mean, it's called yak shaving. It's an argument over something that matters to the people who are arguing about it. That argument, it couldn't affect the world any less, really.
Yeah, so just weird tech infighting about something that ultimately was stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Sounds about right for a conversation happening in a bathroom when people are drunk.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. These people are also these are like private equity people. They're doing cocaine in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, that's for sure. So Maxine, after this whole thing breaks up, we learn that that one of the people that the guy that Lester was arguing with actually works for Gabriel Ice. He's got fingers in pies all across the city, apparently.
Mhm.
And so Lester apologizes for the big commotion, says that Felix is actually supposed to be the one keeping him out of trouble, even though Felix is literally a criminal. And we then learn that Felix is singing September by Earth, Wind, and Fire at the moment. Lord only knows what is playing behind that song. But the two of them get into a conversation here about his time working for Gabriel Ice before he ended up getting out of the whole Hashlinger's sort of corporate entity. And she's trying to probe in there, and she's trying to figure out what might have happened with him. Maxine figures out that he's got some bitterness over his time working for ICE, in which case he reveals that he's working on old web pages for ICE, not necessarily always related to the stuff that Maxine is thinking about. Hashlingers, he's a web designer guy, working on especially encrypted stuff in particular. So things that to his mind, nobody in the office even knew how to read, that he was working on. And that a lot of it was actually stashed in the deep web, to make sure that there was no one peeking around. Everything was being kept secret. And so shortly after ICE purchased Hagawa, he called him into his office, and over the course of a question and answer session, they talked about something that he's not willing to share with Maxine, because he is underneath an NDA. But Maxine is trying real hard to try and figure out what it is, but he says that it's pretty ironclad. There's no way that he's going to be free from that contract until either the universe ends or Daikatana comes out, which is another joke to a niche sort of internet gaming reference of
And
the time
another
period.
anachronism too.
Very true. Yep. Um, so they we don't really know what they talked about. He does kind of reveal that him and Ice talked about something not related to web design, but that was his official job. Um, there is an interesting bit in here where Maxine says only Nuging that guy in there doesn't fit the usual nerd profile. This is another point to the idea that he is potentially inserted into this world from the outside, something that is going to be followed up on in chapter 15 when Maxine talks with March again, but also does fit a lot of these .com guys. Josh Harris in particular was different from a lot of the other .com people. Certainly had a lot of talent and ability, but just the way he presented himself and the way that he kind of conducted himself in public was very different from a lot of them. So is true with Gabriel Ice. Something else is going on with him. And he goes on to say that Gabriel Ice has high level connections and he should be confident in that, but he's not. According to Lester, he's insecure, he's anxious, he's angry. He acts like a loan shark or a pimp who's just learned that he can't depend for help on the cops that he's paying off, or even on the higher levels he has to report to. No SEC to hear his sad complaint, no fraud unit. He's alone. So, at this point, Maxine just hazards a guess that somebody's talking, and that was why he called him into his office, but he doesn't confirm. He's unwilling to say anything more. But Lester says, better not be fucking anything up here. She gets another slight warning in that conversation. And then, sure enough, someone decides to sing Steely Dan.
Which is a reminder that this whole time there have been
there's just
goofy ass songs playing in the background.
Music going in the background. And I don't think there's a single Steely Dan song that I would consider for karaoke.
Nope.
I guess maybe Dirty Work of any of their songs, because that's just well known. But certainly not Dr. Wu. Or whatever mistranslated version of that song that led to the title "Are You With Me, Dr. Wu?" Even though that is not the same title of the song, nor do I think "Are You With Me, Dr. Wu" is ever said in that song at any point.
I don't think it is.
It must have been quite a performance, though. And so she leaves the bathroom and talks about a place that she used to go dancing at called the Danceteria. This is apparently a real club that existed in New York that mostly catered to a disco crowd of all people. Would not have guessed Maxine was a disco fan, but she apparently was. And then suddenly, as Pynchon says, everybody is scattering. The Korean tour bus has shown up, and the driver and the hostess are in a lively screaming fest with their Haywand passengers. Rocky and Cornelia are waving and air kissing their way into the back of the rented town car. Felix is talking earnestly into a mobile phone, and the disguised heavy from the men's toilet removes his thick plastic frames, puts on a ball cap, adjusts an invisible cloak, and vanishes halfway down the block, leaving behind them in the Lucky 18 an empty orchestra playing to an empty room. Just such a great chapter from a standpoint of like, I'm going to invent this weird thing for the reader to go through that has a lot of hilarity in it, but also is going to give us some key information about Gabriel Ice's character and how he has these ironclad confidentiality agreements, these ironclad clauses in these contracts. His people are all over the place and nobody's talking, which means that he's successful in something he's doing, but at the same time he's insecure, he's anxious, he doesn't belong, and he seems to know it, which, coming after the previous chapter where Maxine actually speaks to him on the phone, has a lot of resonance with the way he was behaving there as well.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on chapter 14 before we move on to 15?
Like you said, it's a really good kind of, I mean, it's like almost like a scenario setup that it's almost like it was set up as a scenario that he as an author could then play in to see what would come next. And it's very reminiscent of like something that's one of the only parts of or one of the that's in his writing that's really continued since V through now, is this, like, you set up a scenario with a bunch of weird people in a party to just see what happens, and it's a nice return of that.
Absolutely, yes.
And
I love this book.
I love the note of while for some the night is growing blurry, for Maxine it's turning staccato. Just a great way to put it.
That is a good one, yeah. Yeah, her paranoia is getting cranked up as she talks to this man in the men's toilet. So chapter 15, she wakes up at 11:30 in the morning.
Nice.
Classic stayed up too
Miss
late
those
time
days.
to be waking. Do you?
No, I don't.
Okay.
So I always felt like I was wasting the day when I did that shit.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I always felt.
Like it's refreshing for like the first moment when you wake up. You're like, oh man, I really got to sleep. Fuck, half the day's gone. Well, oh well.
Oh well. Where she sees a car that reminds her of a vintage Packard, only longer. I don't know if everyone gets this joke. If you look up photos of a Packard, that is a long vehicle.
It really is.
It seemed to want to emphasize its cost out of length of materials used in its construction. So the fact that she would see a car that's even longer than that is pretty impressive. And when she goes down to the street, she figures out that it is indeed our old friend Igor Dashkov. And who else is in the car but Marge Keller?
Marge Keller, of all people.
Igor's there to give her some money for the tip that she gave to the fact that Madoff is probably not legit, when she had, I guess you could call it, lunch with him the other day. And he is apparently giving her so much money that she questions if he's fucking insane, and isn't really sure what to do with this amount of money. It doesn't actually say; it just says it's the kind that folds, which is it's got to be a pretty penny. It also seems to have been given to her in a bag for some reason.
Yeah,
and I love the fact that it's not like a briefcase. It's not like a Gladstone. It really reads as if he threw a Walmart shopping bag full of money.
Store bag, yeah.
Yeah, full of money at her. Which is great. When she realizes that March is in the car, she's also counting through a stack of money. And it turns out that she's giving him methcathinone. Methcathinone, I did a little bit of reading on it. It is a real drug. It's not, it isn't usually referred to as that way. It's also not very it's not a popular thing that a lot of people do. The closest thing that I could find to like where it comes from or a related drug to it is something called pot, which is a root chewed by a lot of people in the Middle East and Northern Africa in particular.
It was mentioned earlier too.
Yeah, for like the stimulating effects. I know that like a lot of insurgents for different terror cells in the area also use it as kind of like a drug to stay wired when they're out doing like operations
like
or
speed, basically.
Basically, yes. That's really the only thing that I could see potentially having any relevance. The fact that it was mentioned earlier and the fact that it has that connection to that particular part of the world. There doesn't seem to be a reason why Igor in particular wants a synthesized version of the same chemical compound.
Well, so the funny part, so methcathinone is much stronger than caffeine or the methcathine that are in cat. And it's funny, it's almost like it's a setup for just basically situating these people as like real snobs about something very cheap. Like methcathinone is sometimes it's used as like a replacement for ecstasy, and it's in most of the time if anyone listening is a raver, if you're taking pressed pills, you're taking methcathinone a lot of the time. But it's mostly famous for being like the cheap bargain bin replacement for meth, which is already seen as the cheap
So it's
bargain
like-
bin replacement of cocaine in a lot of
dollar store
cultures.
meth, basically.
Yeah, like methcathinone, I actually looked into it. It's really easy to make. And like the specifics of like, this Chatvian shit is accurate. Like most of the health effects that they're talking about, like, it makes you go wonky. Yeah, it gives you Parkinson's.
Jesus.
The cheaply made stuff gives you manganese toxicity. And yeah, so it's like calling it bathtub speed is a perfect summary of it, because I don't think that's a term that anyone actually uses to refer to methcathinone, but that's what it is. It is like freeze distilling liquor. You're trying to get at brandy or whiskey, and what you're getting is something that's going to make you go blind. And the fact is that even pure methcathinone is like so much worse for you than even methamphetamine, because it's less euphoric in many ways. It's a period of time. It's more commonly toxic, and like it seems to lead to like more intensive withdrawals more reliably. So it's really a shitty drug. These people are like sharing the equivalent of like Robitussin in terms of like how much respect it has in the drug game.
That's interesting. Oof, okay, you owe me a Coke, Cody.
Well, and then to have the contrast between that and then the actual ice cream.
Yeah, for him to then be like, this is the greatest ice cream. It hasn't been ruined by diet culture. It's full fat.
This is the real deal.
The real deal. And then for him to like force several pints of it on her. It isn't just one, he gives her a bunch of them.
Isn't it described as like a family pack or something like that?
Also, he's pitching it as a breakfast, which between that and the fact that his kids each ate 2 pies, I have to wonder what the average meal in the Dashkov household really is.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And you are correct, Cody. It says she ends up with a number of half-kilo family packs in assortment of flavors. Not just one family pack, a number of family packs. So it's actually unclear just how much ice cream has been forced on her.
And then she just puts it into her purse. Like it's not, whatever.
I mean, it was
Ice
the
cream
early
goes in the purse.
2000s
Yeah,
when bag purses were like a thing. Or it's just, how big of a bag can I possibly get stuffed with ice cream? So then both her and March climb out of his car, and March then decides to ask for Maxine's help in picking up Igor's drugs from who but her ex-husband Sid. Turns out she's just the bag man in all this, and Sid is the one who actually has access to the drugs, and they're gonna go get them. You had a note here, Cody, that you were curious what the reason for March's drug running was.
I don't know that I can pin down anything unless I'm forgetting something that happens later. I'm curious what y'all think, like what her reasoning is for engaging in this, other than maybe just boredom or just a fuck you to the system. I don't know.
If no one has a theory, I do.
I mean, the best I've got is that, counter culture people have always had a deep connection with drug dealing because it's a relatively low guilt. Yeah.
Definitely true. I know a lot of the 60s, especially the yippies, those guys got into cocaine dealing and whatnot later in the 80s, so it could be.
So my theory with this, which was actually prompted by you writing the note, the one unfortunate aspect of reading Pynchon, I'll say, is that you kind of just roll with stuff. You read through you read through a whole scene like at the karaoke bar, and then you're like, yeah, of course this woman's dealing drugs with her ex-husband. Why not? But occasionally it's helpful to have somebody like Cody, last name redacted for being too Arabic sounding.
Thank you.
Where you're welcome. Where they really pinpoint something for you to think about. The thing that I really came up with as I was mulling this over during my hours at work today was the idea that it seems to me, as the rest of this chapter goes on, that March and Sid have a very similar relationship to Maxine and Horst, in that there does not appear to be any degree of animosity between the two of them. It honestly seems like the reason why they got divorced was just what happened with their daughter, and that losing their connection to their daughter led to, the eventual dissolution of their marriage. That happens to people a lot of the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure.
When something goes wrong with their kids, they just can't weather that, and they end up getting divorced. And in the same way that Maxine seems to have this dynamic with Horst, in that it's entirely possible that Maxine still loves that guy and would actually want to be married to him and would still be doing a fair amount for him because she cares. I think the same thing is true here with March, in that they are an extreme circumstance because of the kind of person she is and presumably he is, that in the same way that Maxine is fine with Horst looking in on her in the shower, and that she's fine continuing to defend him and to still think that, he's a good guy and like sort of doesn't want him to ever be with anybody else. The same thing is true here with March and Sid, in that, like, yeah, she probably still loves him quite deeply, and probably vice versa, but what happened with Talus was just too much for the marriage to bear, and so they still kind of show their devotion to one another in this way, albeit a bit weird. But to Will's point, countercultural people are usually fine with drug dealing, and that's just kind of how their relationship has persisted, because they don't have any other children to keep them connected in the same way that Maxine has with Horst.
That makes sense.
So yeah, that was my theory. Yeah, Will.
I just to add on, I cannot overstate just how easy it is to make this stuff. Prior to the like mid 2000s, crackdown on pseudoephedrine sales.
Yeah.
I mean, serious. This would have been literally, they might have making it in their bathtub. Like this stuff is not hard to make. It's hard to make safely, but it seems like as long as you're patient and don't care too much about how quickly you're moving weight. Yeah, I mean, this is like the kind of thing that, like, they were party people from back in the 70s. They got into making it because they didn't want to find a new dealer, and they just spiraled into running a business, essentially. I mean, this stuff is methcathinone is so easy to make if you have access to the ingredients. Are Sudafed and some basic household cleaning products. Like, it's not hard. This is like a small operation. It's an incredible amount of irony that Igor is so proud about being able to get this high quality methcathinone.
Could that be a joke about drug availability in the Soviet Union?
Well, that's part of it. I think there's some level of joke going on because to get into the chemistry of it, the difference between methcathinone and methamphetamine is like a specific group called a ketone group, a couple of coupled shuttles. And I think there might be some like three-dimensional joke about the ketogenic diets, such as South Beach and whatever the other big one is, and like the
Atkins.
The Atkins, thank you. And circa 2011, 2012 was when Dr. Oz was talking about raspberry ketones making people lose a bunch of weight.
Jesus
fucking
Christ.
There's just a bunch of weird jokes that are going on in the actual chemistry of the scene about all these people, exchanging full fat ice cream, but taking the less dangerous version of meth, even though it's not actually less dangerous. It's, I mean, and it's all centered around ketone, which is a character later in the book.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. Mainly, I mean, I didn't know that deep of a chemical like composition of the drug, but that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
He's just really hyped on getting his ketones high, so he enters a ketogenic state all the time. Yeah.
Just to be clear, that's not quite how it works. I know you think it was, but just for any listeners who think that might be a good approach.
Please do
not
not
the same.
do not use cot as a way to enter a ketogenic state, please.
Yeah,
But I think you're
failure.
correct, Will. I promise you there are easier ways to do that, like MCT oil.
Well, and there's this whole other layer of fact that so methcathinone used in the Soviet Union as a depressant. These bupropion is a very common antidepressant prescribed all over the world, very similar to methadone, much dangerous, much harder to create. And the whole discussion of like taking an indigenous substance like khat, which is, not a great thing to do for your health. Like, it's really bad for your teeth to chew those leaves all day. But it's, it's kind of like chewing coca versus smoking crack.
Snorting cocaine, yeah.
Yeah, and methcathinone is not the same chemical as, crack is to cocaine or is to coca leaf. But it's, I think, symbolically quite similar to the whole ukulele thing, except inverted.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, nice information there. That whole full fat ice cream thing has now been completely reshaped in my head.
And I mean, it wasn't supposed to be a ketogenic diet ketone pun, because that's.
I feel like it could be though.
The connector is a pun.
Yeah, but he loves those.
No, absolutely. I'm just saying that's
so
as far as.
I feel like you just I feel like you hit on the nail on the head there, Will. So after they leave Igor later that night, March and Maxine go to meet up with March's ex-husband Sid at a place called Choose Hideaway, which is another dance club. And through all of the marijuana smoke choked rooms and people drinking Presidente Longneck in particular at this dance club, they eventually do find Sid. We learn that Sid is, quote, a veteran of Studio 54, worked as a toilet attendant, got out on the floor during breaks, at shift's end gathered up $100 bills forgotten by patrons who'd been rolling them up all night to snort cocaine through, as many as he could get before the rest of the staff, though he himself preferred to use the recessed filter on a Parliament cigarette as a sort of disposable spoon. So quite a guy.
Yeah.
Studio 54 has a very long history that you can go and read. It was a real club in New York that was very famous for attracting a lot of celebrities who went there in particular, but also for just very open and out and about drug use.
All the drugs were there.
People were not doing drugs in the bathroom at Studio 54. They were just doing drugs at Studio 54.
On the floor, on the tables.
Yeah. And its reputation as a place where people went to go do drugs is what got it shut down by the New York City Police Department. It was one of the big kind of New York institutions to go during this period and a little bit beforehand when Giuliani was trying to use a lot of like old code and laws you would think would be off the books to close stuff up. This is one case where they didn't need to do that. They were just able to go in there and clear it out. But man is using the recessed filter on a Parliament cigarette a different level of debauchery when it comes to how you're doing drugs. Really something else. So that gives us an idea of what kind of guy Sid is. Sid takes them out of the club and over to his boat, which happens to be a 1937 Garwood. I forgot the exact number of this. I should have written down, but like those boats go for like multiple hundreds of thousands. Yeah, it is an incredibly expensive boat. Something you would see in a James Bond movie when Bond is like driving himself into the canals of like Venice or something like that, to give you an idea. It's one of these like wood boats from the Art Deco period. And so they do the exchange of money and drugs, and then Sid asks them where he can drop them off. And they start driving around the water, but they run into DEA or potentially Coast Guard people, so he can't quite go the same route that he was going to. So they start just kind of like going around. And this is another moment where Pynchon kind of takes a breath to do some character work, to do some more like scene setting with the city. One of the things that they see is this sort of landfill, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. That's kind of off where Staten Island is, to give you an idea of where they're kind of like riding this boat around at. Staten Island itself is a landfill that they turned into a livable area. And Maxine kind of muses on what's going to happen to the sort of wildlife that used to inhabit this area that's now New York City. For some additional context of this area that she's talking about and that Pynchon is talking about, it was later turned into a public park that is not accessible by human beings. So the like particular piece of Staten Island that she's talking about was later converted into a sanctuary for all the birds that Maxine herself is concerned about. I don't know the exact year that it was completed. So it could have been done by the time Pynchon was writing this book. I'm not sure, but her concern for the birds was addressed in real life. But it's largely more so, I think, again, about the same stuff that Pynchon talked a lot about in Mason and Dixon, and then also talked about in this book with all the gentrification angle, is just this sort of grinding punishment of modernity, of industrialized society, of hypercapitalism, of the need to tear down all of these buildings, creating more waste just to build new buildings, just to get rid of this old infrastructure to create these luxury condos. It's all feeding into the fact that through this whole book, there's been this constant background noise of construction and development, in the same way that there was a constant background noise of deforestation happening in Vineland. And just this is a moment where Maxine finally gets out of the city that's being choked by all these construction vans and these contractors and all of that. And she can kind of see the refuse of what it's doing, of not just the trash from, her garbage and her neighbor's garbage, but also from all of this refuse that's going to come from the buildings being torn down and from all the development. And it leads her to wonder what's going to happen to the wildlife. What are we doing to the planet? What are we doing to this sort of what used to be Eden that we were given in terms of the pre-industrial, pre-modern society? It's such a remarkable section of writing in this book.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think the back half of this chapter becomes a lot less about telling the story and a lot more about, kind of just Pynchon having a moment to just really kind of air his grievances with a lot of New York and a lot of American history. And it's there's some absolutely beautiful scene writing in here. The whole boat trip is absolutely stunning. I love every part of that. But there's a lot of just very opinionated writing in here, and a lot of it obviously comes out through March. Some of it comes out through Sid, but it's a really, really powerful back half of this chapter.
Yeah, definitely. And he ties it all back to his gentrification themes, where it says, which, given the real estate imperatives running this town, is really, if you want to know, fucking depressing. And then the later line about the developer's heart singing, typically, "This land is my land. This land also is my land." It's great. And I think that, like, to your point, Cody, is it Pynchon standing on an apple cart, so to speak, talking about his own personal ideas? Yeah. Is it grounded in the history of the book that he's writing, though? Yeah,
absolutely.
Like, it's incredibly relevant to where the city was at the time and what it underwent to become what it is now. where renting a fucking closet for an apartment is $5,000. And what is kind of slowly happening to the rest of the country. It is one of those moments where, again, like a less, we use this phrase on the show all the time, a less capable writer would not be able to pull this off without it seeming like he was screaming in the audience's face.
Be incredibly ham-fisted.
Yeah, definitely. So they continue on. I do also love the mention of her faith, where it says, let's see where the quote begins. Multiplied by everybody in the city she knows, multiplied by everybody she doesn't know, since 1948, before she was even born. And what she thought was lost and out of her life has only entered a collective history, which is like being Jewish and finding out that death is not the end of everything. Suddenly denied the comfort of absolute zero. I love that as a character moment too, because up until this point, you know, the one time she's been asked if she's a practicing Jew, it wasn't in reference to her religion. It was in reference to her ability to scrimp and save. But at no point has there been an indication that March is a practicing Jew from a religious perspective. That she mostly sees her faith as maybe cultural, or simply that she is ethnically Jewish and not religious. But in this instance, where she's hit by the enormity of something large, it sends her back to that religious state of thinking, which, as somebody whose religion is tied to their faith, or their religion is tied to their ethnicity, is kind of what happens to a lot of people. It's a very accurate experience of what it's like to be a non-practicing Jew, where even though you kind of aren't around it anymore, you'll still have these moments of, yeah, well, this reminds me of the world to come and how that affects, you know, this or that or the other thing. I think it's a great, you know, brief moment of character writing from Pynchon there.
Yeah.
And I think the other note that I had on this too is in the next paragraph, where it says, whatever migratory visitors are still down there, trusting its inviolability, will some morning, all too soon, be rudely surprised by the whispering descent of corporate web crawlers itching to index and corrupt another patch of sanctuary for their own far from selfless ends. Like that's absolutely, as we've talked about a lot on the show, what eventually happens to everything on the internet. But and again, as an illustration of Pynchon's ability as a writer to make this less about him shoving his own opinions down the audience's throat, he ties it once again back to that other theme of it too, of in the same way that the developers of the corporate entities, of the power structures in the company, occupied all the land in Manhattan and in the city of New York, to where it pushed out all of the birds that used to freely fly around, so too are those same corporate interests going to gobble up whatever other free space there is. And in this case, the next frontier of that is the internet. Where do you go when there's no more land left? Well, you go online. Like we said, where do you go when there's no more ad revenue to be made? Well, then you go to just watch time. You go to duration. There's always another evolution of where these people can pull their money and their power from. And in this case, the next thing is going to be the internet. So they continue to kind of try and find another place for them to get dropped off at. And then we get a line here that says, officially the last barge came and went back around the end of the first quarter, Sid recalls, but they're still busy grading it, capping it, sealing and covering it all up and turning it into a park. Another friendly yup resource, Giuliani the tree hugger. This is also later followed up on the next page, where it says, the industrial racket from back in the marshland behind the giant cliffs of ruin has grown continuous. Now and then workers in long-standing sanitation department tradition have lengthy, exhilarated screaming matches. Strange shift to be working, it seems to Maxine. Yeah, nice overtime for everybody. Almost like they're up to something they don't want anyone to know about. This marsh that they're doing this on, for those who don't know the real history here, was eventually the site where all of the 9/11 wreckage was sorted through. So when the towers fell, obviously there was a lot of debris thrown everywhere, and there was a lot of stuff that needed to be gone through and cataloged, and they needed to work through all of this evidence to figure out what may have happened. They couldn't just do that in downtown Manhattan for obvious reasons. So once the fires were out, once they got like a lot of the stuff cleared, a bunch of it was shipped over to this marshland that was just off the coast. Like Bush visited it, all the regulatory agencies visited it that were investigating the whole thing, and it was there for months as they sorted through everything to try and find, you know, anything that might help them in their sort of investigation to whatever degree that was. So looked at it from a conspiracy lens of the book, certainly of what the book is certainly working towards. They're preparing that for when 9/11 does occur. They have this spot cleared out for all these visitors to come as they're doing their work through on it. But in real life, from a non-conspiratorial lens, this was the exact location where the staging ground for the investigation was set up. So that's the particular resonance with this marshland, with this, you know, previous dumping ground for trash being at, and why they're kind of pointing to it. So that's the particular relevance here to real history of this conversation. Beyond the fact that then the other dump that they were circling around was later turned into a park that is a bird sanctuary. We also get to learn some more backstory about how Talus and Gabriel Ice got together and how Sid and March kind of lost control of their daughter in that regard. And again, it's just it's really sad. I know we said this last week, but it's just it is a really tragic, you know, piece of familial drama. And you had the quote in here, Cody, from Best Case Scenario. March says, "Do you want to read that quote out?"
Yeah, so I think this is such a great just description that March gives of Gabriel Ice and who he is. And just to back up a little bit too, you know, they talk about how he was, they watched him kind of, as Sid puts it, morph into what he is today. But then, yeah, in the middle of 168, it says, best case scenario, March says, Ice was an innocent geek corrupted by the dot-com boom. Dream on. Kid was bent from the jump, under obligation to forces which do not advertise publicly. What did they see in him? Easy. Stupidity. A stupidity of great promise. Which speaks a lot to Ice's character. Mm-hmm. And kind of, you know, again, we're getting these kind of opposing pictures of who he is and how dangerous he really is, because on the one hand, you know, you have him being painted as this mastermind, you know, who's putting out all these NDAs and finding ways to shut people up and keep them from, you know, leaking whatever he's leaking. But then he's being undercut at the same time, you know, where Maxine is just dismantling him over the phone, or March is you know, kind of dismantling him like this and saying like he's essentially a pawn. Like he's stupid enough that they can put him into a position of power and know that whoever's pulling the strings has him, you know, doing whatever they want. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's exactly the kind of person that is perfect for that position. Someone who is too dumb to really get the full picture of everything, but smart enough to know how to kind of manipulate the right people. So it really is this picture of Gabriel Ice that we're getting throughout the story is just really interesting. You know, kind of a 1-2 situation. Like which end of this spectrum is he more on?
Yeah, very, very true. And I think that, like, you know, you could very much, to draw it back to the real life character of Josh Harris, there are people who have drawn the same comparison to him, that like his upbringing as the son of a CIA agent, the fact that he was sort of potentially groomed by a CIA therapist, which is one of the most terrifying description. Like the fact that there is a therapist working at the CIA, with the whole history of that organization, is fucking terrifying to consider the reality of. Like all of that is potentially very true with that guy. Like if you look at his sort of insertion into this culture from a conspiratorial lens of like, we need an outsider in there to draw, you know, attention to this .com thing and potentially a negative light, and then the way that his psyche as it was kind of led to his own downfall, CIA involvement or not, which you can watch in that whole documentary I recommended, is really telling if Gabriel Ice has the same thing, which these chapters certainly paint him as having, that he's this manic, confused, you know, he seems to be someone who's being controlled as an asset who knows that he's being controlled as an asset in all of the ways that would present itself negatively from the standpoint of like, I don't want to be this person, but I have no choice. Like, and you know, if we look at this book from a standpoint of setting up a conspiracy to allow 9/11 to happen or to deliberately make it happen, a lot of the details of the conspiracy in this book are not, you know, explicitly fleshed out. Then there would be a lot of people, I think, involved in that who would be doing so reluctantly, and it would cause them to behave in ways that would certainly be erratic and psychologically damaging to themselves. Like from the standpoint of you know, I'm being controlled by this outside asset, and it's going to lead to the deaths of 3,000 Americans in the first sort of attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. Like that would really eat away at your soul, unless you're, you know, at a Brock Vond level of psychopathy.
Yeah.
So it's not a surprise that Gabriel Ice is like this, and it lends a certain degree of intrigue's not the right word, but humanity also feels maybe a bit overstated, but it adds something else to his character from a standpoint of like, you know, he probably didn't have to be this way, you know?
Yeah,
and
circumstances were what they were. He fell into it. Now he can't get out.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's this tragedy to every aspect of this marriage and familial dynamic. Gabriel Ice is trapped in his dynamic with the CIA and with the structure of power in the country and the WASP apparatus that's setting him up. His wife is trapped in a marriage because Gabriel Ice basically owns her rather, and then, you know, her parents are locked out of their relationship with their grandkid and with their marriage for the same reasons. It's just it just shows how power corrupts more than the land. It corrupts the people who occupy it. And when it seeks to do these evil things like 9/11 or, you know, the Gulf of Tonkin or whatever thing you want to bring up from Pynchon's history or real history, it shows the human cost that can come out of that, certainly from a standpoint of just sheer trauma induced in a person.
Yeah, and it serves in terms of his character. It serves to take her a little bit out of the bag lady. Like earlier in this, they mention, you know, something Sid says. Oh, sorry, that's actually later. I thought it was the last page. March lapses for a moment into the bag lady character, and a lot of so far March's appearances in this book could be interpreted as, oh, she's just this crazy old bat who
she's
has
Alex
like
Jones.
These grand theories. Yeah, exactly. But you know, that just that line indicates she doesn't actually demonize this guy who, in slightly more stereotypical characterization, you know, she would be very, very fair to view as having stolen her daughter. She doesn't villainize him. She villainizes the world around him, if only to preserve herself. But, you know, she isn't just some maniac who goes around putting things into her politics, you know? They are people to her.
Yeah, and I think, you know, going back to her parable, I think that's why it's so important that people don't forget, like that line of the price of my silence is more than you could imagine is particularly relevant to what you're saying, Will, where it's like, yeah, this isn't just, you know, dumping asbestos in a harbor somewhere. Like this is also like these are human beings you're affecting. It's significantly different and significantly more costly in that regard. So then after that, they sort of continue on. They talk about the 9/11 site again, where it says either they're playing catch up or they're getting ready to open for dump business again, which they'll dump the 9/11 debris over there. And then that's when Maxine says a presidential visit, somebody making a movie, who knows? technically both of those apply.
Yeah.
As in this book. And then that's where they finally start up the boat again and make their way back around to the point where they can get dropped off in what they're calling Deep Jersey, which just sounds like the worst place to be.
It does.
So they get dropped off, and there's a great quote here where it says, "Maxine's hair is a mess. She's been out all night for the first time since the 1980s. Her ex and their children are somewhere out in the U.S. sure to be having a nice time without her. And for maybe a minute and a half, she feels free, at least at the edge of possibilities, like whatever the Europeans who first sailed up the Passaic River must have felt, before the long parable of corporate sins and corruption that overtook it, before the dioxins and the highway debris and unmourned acts of waste." That just feels sort of like Pynchon tying up all the threads of this last section of the chapter together.
Mhm.
From a standpoint of not only did it have to be this way with Gabriel Ice, it didn't have to be this way, period. Like,
Yeah.
it could have gone so many different ways, and it just happened to have gone the worst way possible. And so March and Maxine get on a bus, and Maxine has a very interesting dream on the bus. She imagines that she is on a bus where everybody's speaking Spanish, and it's a weird situation where the bus is leaving through a jungle. It seems like it's almost leaving through a jungle to escape a threat, and the person leading the bus is none other than Windust, lecturing the bus passengers on the nature of volcanoes. Meanwhile, a volcano behind them, which hasn't gone away, quote, grows more ominous. And then suddenly she wakes up and they decide to go get some breakfast. Do we have any thoughts or interpretations to apply to Maxine's dream?
This may be a bit of a stretch, but I think given the discussion that comes up right after this, could tie into Windust's involvement in South America and the kind of ever-present danger that exists both behind and in front of him. The volcano, obviously is shown as, they're going away from it, but the threat of it still looms over Maxine and everyone on the bus. And of course, Windust is at the center of all that and kind of, giving this smug ass lecture about the nature of volcanoes while this is all happening. So that's my takeaway from it, at least, is that it in some ways is her kind of putting the pieces together of Windust's complicity and involvement in the horrors that went on in South America, and therefore his complicity and involvement in everything that happened as a chain reaction of all of that, which is quite a lot. That's kind of what I took away from it.
Okay. I have a theory that's like crazy conspiracy corner theory.
God, now I really have to make a stinger for this.
But does anyone else have other interpretations before I go into that?
I have one that's also kind of crazy conspiracy.
Oh.
So you got here first, so if you will.
Oh, God damn it. Okay. So if you haven't read Bleeding Edge, skip the next 5 minutes of the podcast or whatever. Nicholas Windust is killed later in the book. At least my interpretation of his disappearance from the text is that he was killed.
Okay.
And I believe that he was killed because he was trying to keep 9/11 from happening. I believe that's why he shot the videotape that is later showing up in the book from the top of the Deseret. That is why he was trying to set up potentially a different circumstance where the towers might be attacked but not taken down, because that would interrupt the actual plan to do 9/11. And I believe he does this because he's bought into the American experiment of it's okay for me to be down in the jungles of South America killing citizens of another country because they're supposedly communists and that's anti-American. But he isn't so evil that he's willing to do what needs to be done, quote unquote, by the elite in his own country. Like his belief in the American experiment and the security doesn't go that far. So he wants to create another circumstance that interrupts the plan to do 9/11, and he's killed for it. The way that I interpret the bus dream is somewhat of a prophetic dream of Maxine not knowing what all of this is leading towards yet. So she's just kind of remembering the imagery of, the jungles and of the Spanish speaking people that Windus previously interacted with as analogs for the affected populations of what he's doing. But the fact that he's sort of speaking about the nature of volcanoes, which in this case I'm interpreting as the nature of power, as the nature of government intervention, as the nature of you could say false flag attacks, whether it's the stuff that was set up to kill people in South America or within the conspiratorial elements of this book with 9/11, with the Twin Towers being hit. He's trying to reveal that to the people of the bus as he's guiding them to safety from it. And it's interesting that they use the term jungle. Oftentimes New York is referred to as a concrete jungle. Other large cities are referred to that way as well. The World Trade Center wreckage burned for days, which obviously volcanoes are known for the fire and burning that they cause of the place around them. But he's in this process of pulling people out of it, pulling people to safety while also still lecturing them. So there's that dynamic of good and bad there. He's willing to do bad in South America, but not within the United States, where he's going to actually try and help something to not happen. That's my crazy crackpot reading of this whole dream. I'm not saying that it's right, but that's the way that I interpret what's on the page there.
That's a valid argument. I'm not I don't think that's that crazy.
Will, it's your turn.
Yeah, I mean, what you outlined there is going to make what I'm about to say a lot easier to explain. So thank you, because I think that's a really good summary of how I would interpret this, what I'm about to jump into.
Okay.
Basically, we were talking a lot about structural analysis earlier in this episode, and at this point, what I want to draw a comparison to between these three chapters, all three of them, but just pages of chapter 15, is that this part of the book, and going on for quite a while into the book, at least another 6 chapters, I think, is a lot of Pynchon playing in the same space, which in The Crying of Lot 49, he shoved all into chapters 4 and 5, where basically in that instance, getting around, having been sensitized to the symbols around her, and experiences these waking dreams where she can no longer distinguish reality from fantasy. And it is through the supposedly, in the mind of the narrator of that book, she is therefore sensitized into actually through those dreams able to see the reality around her. And in this specific context, Maxine has finally had everything set up for her. She understands all of the players basically introduced. And from there, it's all about her trying to figure out what's going on. And here, I think, is Maxine being in the boat, separated from all the noise, her subconscious being able to register these things in advance. That she has achieved the kind of intimacy with this conspiracy towards 9/11, that she is able to predict these things happening. And so, just on the previous page, you have these birds showing up, and, classically, birds arriving is a very strong signal of disaster. And to have that followed up so immediately with, you know, the very, very obtuse symbol of a volcano for the towers collapsing. I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a third augur of some kind in these 4 or 5 pages that are kind of like, hey, everybody, just like with Bernie Madoff, why isn't everyone seeing this coming? And Maxine is seeing it coming, but it's so absurd that she can't consciously believe it. It's a little too big of something for her bladder to lead her to, but she's still aware.
Yeah, that's great.
I definitely have to make music for this now because that's 2 good ones in a row. I feel like there needs to be something to really highlight that. That's a lot to think about. So thank you both.
One of these days, we're gonna have an actual conspiracy corner that isn't seemingly completely understandable.
Somebody needs to come up with something so unhinged and out there that the rest of us are like, what the fuck?
Yeah, maybe against the day whenever we get around to that.
Yeah,
who knows? So when they end up going to their chosen place to have breakfast, which happens to be another Latino restaurant, similar to the ones that we've been to a lot in the past 6 chapters. Maxine asked March what was going on in Guatemala back in 1982. Short answer is this is where a lot of the Iran-Contra stuff happened from the Contra side of it. The Contras were fighting against the popular government that was put in place through a coup. And Reagan didn't like the Contras because they were, anti-American in their political leanings as far as what they believed in. So he was trying to arm and support the Contras, but it turns out that was a bad idea because they were doing a genocide of the Mayan people in Guatemala. And so Reagan was told to stop doing that. Reagan decided he didn't want to stop doing that. He just really loved giving them guns. And so he instead sold missiles to Iran to send even more money to Nicaragua in a laundering scheme that all ran through Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. This is all very widely publicly available information that you can read about. He was directly supporting the genocide of the Mayan people in Guatemala by doing so, and just couldn't keep himself from it to the point that he wanted to sell something to another enemy of America to keep doing it. Quite crazy.
People love that guy too.
Everyone people love
best.
Ronald Reagan. He's this really cool dude. Still to this day, people are quite big fans of his.
Fucking ridiculous.
Despite all of that. So yeah, if you want more information on that, look up the Iran-Contra scandal. Look up the Guatemalan Civil War, which went on for a very long time. This portion of it was really just a couple years of a multi-decade sort of war that went on down there. And so that's what all the stuff that they're getting to there is concerned. And so suddenly, Maxine finds herself not very hungry. What a surprise after learning that information. And then she asks about any Americans who might have been in Guatemala. And March's response is either humanitarian kids, naive and borderline idiotic, or advisors sharing their extensive expertise in butchering non-whites. Though by then, most of that was being outsourced to U.S. client states with the necessary technical chops. Why do you ask? And we know that Mr. Windust worked for the School of the Americas, which, as we talked about on the last episode, did exactly what March is talking about. So just sort of Maxine putting together some final pieces about who this man really is, or at the very least was. And then that closes out chapter 15. Do we have any other thoughts from this chapter?
I was going to say that the fact Windust's wife, Xiomara, disappeared right around then is, I think, or when rebelling against the machine of whatever caused 9/11 and caused things in Central America.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, mine isn't super important. It's a little bit perhaps paranoid rather than conspiratorial, but I do think it's interesting and perhaps telling that they never actually. It doesn't seem like they ever actually see the boat that's pursuing them. It's unclear how long they're pursued. It does state that it's this time of night it has to be the Galdern DEA. Um, but I mean, and maybe I've seen too many TV shows and movies, and I'm not super familiar with the realities of um, drug running and in terms of how much resources they're going to devote to trying to bust you. I also don't really know why they're so paranoid. I mean, if like the boat could just be another boat going around New York City around that time. All that to say, I do think it is possible to interpret them being chased as another instance of Maxine being followed. The guy says, it has to be the Goldern DEA, but it could just as likely be somebody, the people that she was followed by earlier in the book. It could be more related to Maxine's looking into hash slingers or stuff like that. It's not. I don't think it's definitely not explicit that who is following them. And I do think you could interpret it as another instance of Maxine being followed, just kind of in general, rather than it being specifically the DEA or the Coast Guard. One thing that kind of strengthens that in my mind is that you would think that if the DEA were on to what Sid was doing, that they would maybe do about helicopters, and maybe have boats coming in from the other way to trap them. Like, it seems kind of random that just like a random boat shows up and chases them. And to me, that makes me think that it's quite possible that it's just another instance of Maxine being followed.
I don't think you're crazy at all, Luke. I've
No,
always
I think that's
I've always interpreted it a little bit differently, but I either could be correct. My interpretation has always been that the reason why the boats are out there is to keep anyone from watching them clear out what's going to be the 9/11 wreckage site, because as they make comments about, there's really no reason for construction crews to be doing just a dump cleanup at like 1 a.m. That isn't a time sensitive thing. You can just do that during normal working hours. But it would also be weird to have like CIA, FBI boats roaming the water in New York, protecting a random piece of Staten Island for something that's happening months from now. But you can make a plausible case that the DEA might be roaming around the water of New York to look for drug dealers. That's how I've always interpreted the reason why they're there. But Maxine being followed is easily another way to look at that as well, for sure.
And it's not like March doesn't have plenty.
Also true.
yeah. I would think if anybody's following them legitimately, it would probably be whoever was following Maxine.
Yeah, no, you're definitely correct, Luke, in that there's not really any reason for the DEA to just have boats in the New York waterways.
Gotta catch this one methadone dealer.
Mm-hmm. We got to catch this one person selling the penny stocks of meth.
Any W is a W, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the way the federal government
That
sees
is
things, actually.
That is how the police, yeah.
All right. Funny parts. Did we miss any that someone wanted to bring up?
I think the only ones we went over most of them. I can't even goddamn talk anymore. I did like Sid's comment of let me find it here. I'll let you two off when I can, then I'm going to return to my secret undisclosed base like he's goddamn Batman or something.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lester's quote unquote lunch with Gabriel Ice. I thought I'd at least get lunch, which instead turns out to be instant coffee and health food tortilla chips in a bowl, no salsa, no salt even. Which, I mean, when you consider the situation and, he's sitting face to face with Gabriel Ice, like that's just got to make it that much worse. So.
Yeah. I mean, he went so far as to make coffee for them.
Yeah.
or have coffee made. Which also,
Yeah.
coffee and health food tortilla chips is such a strange
Terrible combination.
for snack.
I mean,
I
it's like the haircut. It's like a power. It's the power play. There's nothing else.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Nobody is serving those and thinking this is what people want.
This is
Yeah.
what people like to eat.
They like eating nice cooked cornmeal and probably stale coffee.
Delicious.
Sounds great. Yeah, actually, what actually just occurred to me, well, not just, but like over the course of recording this episode, Cody, is that in the cabbie getting like into the chase, that whole sequence, that reminds me a lot of the scene in the Humphrey Bogart Big Sleep adaptation, where he has that cab driver follow the person from Geiger's bookstore to Geiger's house, and then at the end of it, he says like, you did a great job, and then she gives him like her phone number to call her again if he ever wants to do this again.
He has to follow someone else again
because she enjoyed it so much.
About that.
Yeah, so that could be just a coincidence, but I feel like that could be a reference to that movie.
Very well could be.
Yeah.
I do think it's pretty funny in the 13th chapter 13 that the two Russian kids, I interpreted them as teenagers, but it is pretty funny that they just start rapping in Russian and they do DJ sound effects and stuff like that. I mean, it's just kind of random, but it is just kind of funny to picture two, Russian teenagers in a restaurant, like a diner in New York, just breaking out Russian rapping. It's just kind of funny to picture.
Very true.
Yep.
My favorite joke that we haven't meant, I think, is just the little aside. How nice to meet your acquaintance, Misha and Grisha, whatever your names may be. Like,
yeah,
that's useful parent scene right there. You're assuming that these children Doom, Game Boy, and rapping to each other are stealing their eyes.
I mean, they do have metal teeth.
Well, they're into Russian hip hop. They're wearing grills.
The Might Old West joke at the beginning is one of the all-time Pynchon groaners, in my opinion, too. It's such a terrible pun.
Oh,
it's not necessarily funny, but
that brings us to quotes. Who wants to go first?
Mine is the opening paragraph of chapter 15. Around 11:30 in the morning, Maxine spots a substantial black vehicle, which reminds her of a vintage Packard, only longer, parked near her office, disregarding the signs that say no parking for an hour and a half, and on that side to allow for street sweeping. Usual practice is for everybody to double park on the other side and wait for the sweeper to come through, then move back in its wake and park legally again. Maxine notices that nobody is waiting near the mystery limo, and that, even more curiously, parking enforcement, usually found in this neighborhood like cheetahs at the fringes of antelope herds, is mysteriously absent. Here, in fact, even as she watches, comes the sweeper, wheezing noisily around the corner, then, catching sight of the limo, pausing as if to consider its options. Procedure would be for the sweeper to pull up behind the offending vehicle and wait for it to move. Instead, creeping nervously up on the block, it swerves apologetically around the lengthy ride and hastens to the corner. I love the kind of juxtaposition of the nature documentary and the urban street sweeper documentary that's taking place here. It's funny, and I like the showing the power that car clearly has, that the street sweeper's like, ooh, maybe not, okay, and just kind of inches around it and goes about its way. Great opener, great writing, funny, does a lot. I love it.
That was a lot of rapid thoughts in quick succession.
It was.
There at the
My
end,
brain
Cody.
is slowly shutting down.
Oh man. My quote comes from page 166. It's the whole sort of long description from 166 to 167 of all of like the trash and everything, but I really like particularly the first paragraph of it, where it says, under the high arching open work of the Bayonne Bridge, oil storage tanks, tanker traffic forever unsleeping, addiction to oil gradually converging with the other national bad habit, inability to deal with refuse. Maxine has been smelling garbage for a while, and now it intensifies as they approach a lofty mountain range of waste. Neglected little creeks, strangely luminous canyon walls of garbage, smells of methane, death, and decay, chemicals unpronounceable as the names of God, the heaps of landfill bigger than Maxine imagines they'd be, reaching close to 200 feet overhead, according to Sid, higher than the typical residential building on the Upper West Side. It's like the whole sequence of 5 paragraphs, all the way until a long eerie wait to see on page 167, is really great. But that first paragraph in particular, I really love from the standpoint of talking about this national addiction to oil that the country is getting, which obviously deals with a lot of the stuff with 9/11 as a pre-context for invading Iraq and Afghanistan and other aspects of the book that it's already talked about. But then bringing that back to, once again, like he directly tying the refuse of a city with the gentrification and development that is happening actively in that city by comparing the size of the garbage hills to the size of the high rises, I just think is really genius. Yeah. And the whole way that he kind of describes this peninsula of garbage has some incredibly effective pieces of description in it.
Yeah, my quote is from that same section. It's just a little bit further down. I'll read it out. Every fairway bag full of potato peels, coffee grounds, uneaten Chinese food, used tissues and tampons and paper napkins and disposable diapers, fruit gone bad, yogurt past its sell-by date that Maxine has thrown away is up in there someplace, multiplied by everybody in the city she knows, multiplied by everybody she doesn't know since 1948, before she was even born, and what she thought was lost and out of her life has only entered a collective history, which is like being Jewish and finding out that death is not the end of everything, suddenly denied the comfort of absolute zero. I really love the cadence of the list, the use of the word "and" in the middle of it. In particular, that little prose, a little stylized prose, I really like. And then I've been rereading Gravity's Rainbow. I finished the first section a week or so ago. Then I'm going back and rereading some of the chapters that I felt like I needed to kind of get a better handle on. And especially the first section of Gravity's Rainbow is a lot about Pavlovian, and people already know this, but all about Pavlovian conditioning and all the stuff about going beyond the zero, and Slother being conditioned as a child, and whether or not his conditioning was extinguished, and whether or not it went so far as to go beyond the zero. So like, it's now like in the next. I have a hard time wrapping my head around all that stuff. That's just partially why I'm rereading Gravity's Rainbow in general. But it does, it is kind of cool that he equates going beyond the zero with the afterlife and stuff. It does seem to be kind of a callback to Gravity's Rainbow. If you really kind of dig in and build something out of nothing. And yeah, I don't know, it does occur to me sometimes, this comes up in Infinite Jest as well, like what happens to all the trash I throw away? What happens to everything I try to recycle? Like, where does it go? Are we going to eventually reach a point where like there's just piles of trash everywhere, uh, on the outskirts of cities or something? It does kind of comes up in Infinite Jest, I think, a lot, mostly in the world building rather than the actual action of the plot. I just find all that stuff really interesting to think about, and it is kind of interesting to me that all that it occurs to Maxine that all the stuff she's thrown away is literally all in one place. Yeah.
Will, what about you?
Well, what about me is that between the conversation and the last you two, all of favorite quotes, all of my favorite quotes have been selected or have been so ized that it feels weird to just read like 3 lines in the middle of other things. So I'm just gonna go with like not my favorite, but a really fun little quote. Back in the karaoke bar, and who is so fancy that they can't appreciate arguably among the greatest pop tunes ever written. Young man dreams he's flying in the sky above it all defying gray and time, like having midlightly in the second verse he wakes up back on Earth. First sees the big blue eyes of the woman he loves, and that will turn out to be sky enough for him. All men should grow up so quickly. Just fun.
Did anyone else just have Will cut out really bad?
Yeah, I was about to say it cut out
Do you-
real bad for a minute
Good
there.
stuff.
We heard the quote, just your explanation afterwards, not so much.
Mhm.
All I really said was it's just a lovely little bit of extended imagery.
True. Yeah, I can't really listen to that song without visually seeing the opening to the Rum Diary in my head, because that's the song that plays at the beginning of that movie. But it does evoke a feeling.
Oh,
Is that movie good, by the way?
Yeah, I
Jesus.
fucking love that movie. I talked to Will
Never
about
seen
it. Yeah, I talked to Will about it extensively in the portion of our bonus episode that wasn't released because there was too much conversation in that.
It's like 4 hours.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
There's a lot
really
of Rum
really good.
Diary.
There is a lot of Rum Diary. So that brings us to most Pynchon part of the chapter. What did we all have for that?
I have 2. Yeah.
Breaking the rules.
I know. The first one is the word nooging. I've come to find that Pynchon really loves his double O verbs in this book. We've had nooging. I think this is the second time nooging has come up, and then smooshing earlier. So it's like those are just words that I don't hear ever outside of this book.
And why
love
would
it
you?
because of that. The other is very Pynchonian self-insert, I think, where March is talking about the Madoff situation and says, no, I meant late capitalism is a pyramid racket on a global scale, the kind of pyramid you do human sacrifices up on top of, meantime getting the suckers to believe it's all going to go on forever. So those 2.
Yeah, the human pyramid line's a really good one. My most Pynchon part of the chapter would be the dream that Maxine has on the bus at the end of chapter 15. If my theory about what that dream means is correct, then that is certainly a confluence of ideas and meaning that I'm fairly certain no other author in the history of the world would be able to come up with.
So my most mentioned part is we've already kind of gone over it. It's the thing on the PA system where, I get that Cody is probably scared of it too. I didn't necessarily think about the fact that there are, and this is I think is very much a white male thing to skate over is there are going to be minorities that are not going to want to be called over the PA system. But
I'm not in that category. I am as white as they come.
but you know what I'm saying though is that
Yeah,
like
yeah. No,
your
it's
name
just-
makes it seem like you're a minority. I guess. Is what I'm
Yeah.
getting at.
It's that and a social anxiety thing for sure.
But yeah, that struck me as a very Pynchon thing to include. And then the other one we've also gone over, but I'm blanking on what it. Oh, it was just the quote I think that Kate and I went over. It's a very Pynchon thing to do to kind of contemplate where does the trash go and
Mhm.
all that stuff. Also, the Upper West Side thing is I imagine that's a pretty common joke in New York City, but that's a very Pynchon kind of pun.
Very true.
Presuming that the extended pun on ketogenic diets and ketones as a functional group is not front and center for the actual reading experience. I love the fact that he did like some decent research into Eastern European drug culture because he pulls out these terms like Schnaga and Jeff. These are like real terms, like meanings that are used properly in this context. It's not grand theme coming to a head, like most of the moments that y'all chose, but it is also just extremely, and to do that much research for something that really doesn't matter to the rest of the book. You don't need Igor using these accurate Eastern European studies of the
Yeah, Pynchon is nothing if not dedicated to the bit
Yeah.
in all aspects of what that means. I'm sorry, can you clip you going yeah just a second ago out? That was
I'm telling you guys, my brain. I haven't eaten since like 11 o'clock this morning. My whole body's starting to shut down. I
would
will
love
cook that. I will add some like heavier ass reverb to it or something to really accentuate it. I don't know what that noise was, but it came out of my mouth.
It was great. I'd love to use it as a text message notification if possible.
Yeah, I'll send you an MP3 of it later.
Sounds good.
Well, plug it into a synthesizer and get some weird stuff going on, and use that as the core sample for the theme song to Crazy Conspiracy Corner.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Maybe like the sound effect of a bong going off, and then that noise that you made. Oh God! All right. So we have nothing else to add to this. This was an interesting episode of our
Really
podcast.
I think if we go back, if we remember how this started, it says a lot about how it ended. Also.
Oh my God. That's gonna do it for us for chapters 13, 14, and 15. We are going to be on a break next week, so there will be no episode for you next Sunday. I'm sorry, next Friday. That's when we release these.
We clearly
episodes.
need a break at this point.
This is what I get for running a coffee shop that's right next to a university. That's just not. Should not have. It's bad 4 weeks out of the year, and the rest of it's fine. But when we return from our break, we're going to continue on with our 3 chapters per episode scheme. We'll be going over 16, 17, and 18 for all of you at home there. If we have any college students listening, I'd hazard a guess that we do. Good luck on your finals.
Yeah.
Although I'm pretty sure when this episode is released, that's already happened. So hopefully you didn't get totally shafted on your finals. As always, thank you everybody for listening. Pynchon in Public Day is going to be May 8th. That will not have happened.
That will have already happened, yes.
God damn it.
now. It's Wednesday. Oh, man.
I hope you had a good Pynchon in Public Day. That was 2 days ago. Feel free to send a picture of what you're doing to us afterwards. As
never come back
to commemoration of this fucking podcast episode. We are on Twitter at PynchonPod. We are on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Podcast. You can email us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.